The road south from Blackwater Bridge should have felt like relief. They'd won, after all, disrupted the ritual, freed the prisoners, neutralized the bridge troll, and watched the cult's chant leader walk away in something that looked almost like surrender. The 8 survivors they'd pulled from the gatehouse cages were safely headed toward Thornfield, with provisions and clear directions. Escorted part of the way by a merchant caravan Aragorn had flagged down with a particular authority that made people comply without quite knowing why. Victory. Clean enough by the standards of the work they did. So why did the air feel wrong? Gandalf noticed it first on the morning of the second day after the bridge. They'd made camp in a shepherd's shelter, long abandoned but structurally sound, and he'd risen before dawn as was his habit, intending to brew tea and think through the implications of the 2 tokens they'd recovered from the cult. The fire wouldn't light properly. Not that it refused entirely. Gandalf's skill with flame was too fundamental for ordinary wood to resist him. But the color was wrong. Instead of the warm yellow-orange of healthy combustion, the flames ran pale, almost blue-white at their tips, and gave off noticeably less heat than they should have. He held his hand closer to the fire than was comfortable and felt only moderate warmth, as if something was taxing the heat between the flame and his skin. "That's not right," he murmured to himself, then louder. "Aragorn, come look at this." The ranger emerged from the shelter's dark interior already fully alert, sword belt on, moving with the instant readiness of someone who'd spent decades sleeping in dangerous places. He crouched beside Gandalf and studied the fire without touching it. "Cold today," he observed. "More than yesterday. We're heading into higher country, but not high enough to justify this." He gestured at the frost that had formed on the shelter's stone walls overnight. Unusual for this elevation and season, but not impossible. What was impossible was the frost still being present an hour after sunrise with a fire burning less than 10 feet away. Gandalf pulled a small glass vial from his robes, one of several he kept for exactly this kind of field analysis, and carefully captured a tongue of flame inside it, sealing it quickly. The flame continued to burn inside the glass, but its color remained wrong, pale, cold, almost hostile despite being fire. "The heat is being stolen," he said quietly. "Not consumed naturally, not dispersed by wind, actively taken by something." Stella had woken during this exchange and now joined them, wrapping her cloak more tightly despite standing near the fire. Her breath hung in the air far longer than it should have, little clouds of vapor that lingered like smoke, refusing to disperse. "I've seen references to this," she said, her voice still rough with sleep, but her tone sharp with recognition. "In the cult's restricted texts, the ones only the senior members could access, they called it the White Hunger. It's supposed to be a kind of punishment, a consequence that follows certain kinds of oath-breaking or burden stealing." "Burden stealing," Gandalf repeated, turning the phrase over. "The crowning ritual. They were trying to transfer the cost of the key song from the singer to the substitutes, making other people pay the price of power. That's definitely burden stealing. And we disrupted it," Aragorn added. "Broke the circle, freed the vessel before the binding could complete. Does that count as breaking an oath from the magic's perspective?" Stella considered this. Maybe. The ritual structure treats the binding as a kind of contract, an obligation accepted by the substitutes, even if they never actually agreed. If we broke that contract mid-formation, the magic might interpret it as a violation rather than a rescue. "So we're being punished," Aragorn said flatly, "for doing the right thing." "Magic doesn't care about right and wrong," Gandalf said, more to himself than to them. "Only structure and consequence. If we triggered a conditional response built into the ritual's framework, then yes, we're dealing with the aftermath. He looked at the pale fire, the lingering breath fog, the frost that wouldn't melt, the white hunger. What does it do exactly? The texts weren't specific, Stella admitted. They spoke of cold that follows, of warmth being eaten, of resolve draining away. It was described more as a warning than a documented phenomenon. This is what happens if you steal burdens improperly, that kind of thing. I always assumed it was metaphorical. It's not, Gandalf said, standing and walking to the shelter's entrance. Outside, the landscape was wrong in ways that became more obvious in proper light. The grass, what little grew this high, was rimmed with frost that had a crystalline clarity to it, more like glass than ice. The morning sun, which should have been melting it, seemed to pass through without effect, and when Gandalf exhaled deliberately, his breath didn't just fog, it hung in a cloud that persisted for 5 full seconds before finally, reluctantly, beginning to thin. Behind him, Alfharin emerged from the shelter's interior, where he'd been sleeping near Stella for warmth. The wolf's behavior was immediately notable. His fur was standing on end, not in aggression but in response to something environmental. His nose was low, working constantly, and his ears swiveled in that particular way that indicated he was tracking something difficult, a scent that kept vanishing and reappearing. Through their bond, Gandalf felt what Alfharin was experiencing. The scent of the landscape was wrong, not corrupted the way the black water at Blackwater Bridge had been corrupted, but emptied, as if something was eating the smell of life itself, leaving behind an absence that felt worse than decay. He senses it too, Gandalf said quietly. Whatever this white hunger is, it's not just temperature. It's a predator, and it's close. They broke camp quickly and moved south with weapons ready and senses alert. The road, such as it was this high in the hills, showed no signs of other travelers, which was unusual for a route that should have seen at least some shepherd traffic. The silence was profound and uncomfortable. It was Alfharin who found it. The wolf stopped suddenly in the middle of the road, hackles raised, and gave a low whine that Gandalf had learned meant not fear, but wrongness, the signal for something that violated natural law so completely that even a predator's instincts rejected it. 20 yards ahead, just off the path where the grass met a tumble of frost-covered rocks, a hare was frozen mid-leap, not dead and frozen, not killed and then subjected to cold. Frozen in the act of jumping, all 4 legs extended, ears back, eyes still open and clear. As if in one instant it had been alive and moving, and in the next instant all motion had simply stopped. Arrested by cold so absolute and sudden that death hadn't even had time to close the eyes. Aragorn approached it carefully, not touching, but examining from close range. No blood, no wounds, no sign of predation or disease. It just stopped, Gandalf finished. The white hunger took it, drained the warmth, the breath, the resolve to keep moving, and left this. Stella was staring at the frozen hare with an expression that combined horror and recognition. The text mentioned this. They said the hunger doesn't kill in any normal sense. It just stops things, takes the warmth that lets life continue and leaves everything else intact, like pausing a moment permanently. Can it be reversed? Aragorn asked. Aragorn. Gandalf crouched beside the hare, placed his hand near, not touching, and spoke a word that should have generated warmth. The air around his hand brightened slightly, but the hare remained exactly as it was, frozen, stopped, beyond reach. No, he said quietly. What's taken is gone. This hare is dead in every way that matters, even if its body doesn't know it yet. He stood, brushing frost from his robes. We need to move. Whatever generated this effect is somewhere ahead of us, and it's not passive. It's hunting. Hunting what? Stella asked, though she clearly already suspected the answer. Us, Aragorn said simply, or anyone who carries the consequences of what we did at the bridge. We broke the cult's ritual, and the white hunger is the price. They moved on, faster now, each of them checking their weapons and supplies with the methodical focus of people who understood that the easy part of their journey was over. Behind them, the frozen hair remained in its eternal leap, a small monument to the moment when warmth had lost and cold had won. The white hunger had arrived, and it was only beginning. The road climbed higher into country that felt increasingly unfamiliar despite Aragorn's extensive maps and decades of ranging experience. The frost didn't retreat with the climbing sun. If anything, it thickened, spreading across stones and dead grass in patterns that looked almost deliberate, as if the cold was being placed rather than occurring naturally. By midday, or what Gandalf estimated was midday based on the pale disk of sun, barely visible through high gray clouds, they encountered the traveler. He was sitting on a milestone at the road's edge, not resting exactly, but simply stopped, staring at his hands with an expression of profound confusion. He was dressed for travel. Good boots, a weatherproof cloak, a pack that suggested merchant or craftsman rather than vagrant, but something about his posture was deeply wrong. Too still, too focused inward. Aragorn signaled a halt 20 feet away and approached cautiously, hand on sword hilt but not drawing. "Traveler," he called, "are you well? Do you need assistance?" The man looked up, and his eyes were clear. No fever, no obvious injury, no sign of the kind of distress that would explain his behavior. He began, then stopped, frowned, started again. I am... Another pause, longer this time, and when he spoke again, his voice carried genuine distress. "I don't remember. I was going somewhere. North? South? I had a reason. I know I had a reason." "What's your name?" Gandalf asked gently, moving closer but staying outside arm's reach. "My name is..." The man's face went blank, not unconscious, conscious and trying, visibly straining to retrieve information that should have been immediate and automatic. "I know it. I know my name. It's... His hands clenched. "Why can't I remember my own name?" Stella had gone very pale. "Unnames," she breathed, barely audible. "He's being affected by unnames, or something like them." Gandalf had heard references to unnames in the intelligence they'd compiled on the cult's activities, entities or phenomena that eroded identity and meaning, that fed on names and definitions the way natural predators fed on flesh. They'd been mentioned as part of the broader category of threats the cult's seal-breaking might release, but always in theoretical terms, always as future possibility rather than present danger. "We're not near any of the major seal sites," Aragorn said quietly. "The closest is still 3 days north. The watchtower we're heading toward. Unnames shouldn't be active here." "They shouldn't be active anywhere," Gandalf corrected. "They're meant to be sealed, contained, prevented from manifesting. But if the cult's experiments at Blackwater Bridge created a breach, not in the specific seal we disrupted, but in the broader magical structure that keeps these things separated from the world." He didn't need to finish. They all understood. The cult's ritual hadn't just failed locally. It had created a wound in reality's fabric, and things were seeping through. Gandalf turned back to the confused traveler. "Listen to me carefully. I'm going to help you remember something. Just one thing, not everything. Don't try to remember your name right now. Don't try to remember where you're from. Just focus on this. Where were you going? What direction?" The man's eyes focused with visible effort. "North," he said after a long moment. "I was going north. To... The certainty wavered, but Gandalf spoke quickly before it could dissolve entirely. "Good. Hold that. North. You are going north. Say it." "I am going north," the man repeated, and something stabilized in his expression. Not full recovery, but a single point of certainty in the confusion. Stella moved closer, her hands making small gestures that Gandalf recognized as the physical component of a grounding phrase. One of the few pieces of cult training that could be repurposed for genuine help rather than manipulation. She spoke quietly, rhythmically. "You are a person. You are traveling north. You have a reason. The reason is yours. Hold the direction. Hold the movement." The man's breathing steadied slightly. The blankness in his eyes receded a fraction. "It's not enough," Stella said to Gandalf without looking away from the traveler. "The grounding will hold for maybe an hour, maybe less. Whatever's affecting him is progressive. Eventually he'll lose everything: direction, purpose, the knowledge that he's a person at all. He'll just stop, like the hair." "Can we reverse it?" Aragorn asked. "I don't know," Gandalf admitted. "The Unnames work by consuming definition. They eat the things that make identity stable. A name is the strongest anchor, but once it's gone, other anchors can substitute temporarily. Direction, purpose, relationship. But those are weaker. They'll erode faster." He crouched to the traveler's eye level. "Do you remember anyone? Anyone who matters to you? Family, friends, anyone?" The man's face worked through several expressions, recognition flickering and fading like a candle in wind. "There was someone, I think. Someone who I was." The flicker died. "No, gone. I can't." Gandalf placed a hand on the man's shoulder, and through the contact he could feel it. A cold that wasn't temperature, a void that wasn't space. Something was actively eating the warmth of identity from this person, and the white hunger and the unnaming were not separate phenomena but connected, maybe even the same thing manifesting in different ways. "We need to keep moving," Aragorn said, and there was genuine regret in his voice but also necessity. "If this is spreading, if it's following us or radiating from the ritual site, staying here puts us at greater risk." "What about him?" Stella asked, gesturing to the traveler. "We can't carry him," Aragorn said bluntly. "And if we try to bring him with us, we might accelerate his exposure to whatever this is. The kindest thing might be to leave him here with supplies and hope the effect stabilizes once we're gone." It was a brutal calculation, and Gandalf hated it, but he also recognized its accuracy. They were 3 people, 4 counting Alfharin, trying to prevent a catastrophe that would affect thousands or more. One confused traveler, already partially lost to the unnaming, could not become their primary focus, but he could give the man one thing. Gandalf stood and pulled a small token from his pouch, a silver coin stamped with a tree, old and worn, but still clearly defined. He pressed it into the traveler's hand. "Hold this," he said. "Don't let go of it. When you forget what it is, when you forget why you have it, when you forget everything else, hold it anyway. It's yours. That's all you need to know. It's yours, and you're holding it." The man's fingers closed around the coin. "Mine," he repeated. "I'm holding it." "Yes, hold it and keep going north. One step, then another. Don't stop moving as long as you can move." They left him there, sitting on the milestone, clutching the silver coin, staring north with the fragile determination of someone holding on to the last thread of purpose. Gandalf looked back once and saw the man stand, sway slightly, then take one careful step northward, then another, still moving. For now. "He won't make it," Stella said quietly as they walked. "Probably not," Gandalf agreed. but he'll make it farther than if we'd done nothing. And right now, farther is all any of us can offer." Alfharin, who had been watching the exchange with the intense focus of an animal trying to understand human behavior that made no survival sense, pressed close against Gandalf's leg. Through their bond, the wolf communicated something that Gandalf interpreted as both question and statement. "The world is breaking, and we are walking toward the break." "Yes," Gandalf murmured, resting his hand briefly on the wolf's head. "We are, because if we don't, no one will." The road continued to climb. The frost continued to thicken. And somewhere ahead, somewhere in the high country where old towers watched empty valleys, something waited that was colder and hungrier than anything they'd faced before. Behind them, diminishing with distance but still visible when Gandalf looked back, the traveler continued his slow, determined walk northward, clutching a silver coin and holding on to the last fragments of a purpose he could no longer name. One step, then another, still moving. For now, the ascent into the high pass took them the rest of the day, and with every 100 feet of elevation gained, the wrongness of the world intensified in ways that went beyond simple cold. The path they followed was old, ranger-marked centuries ago, and maintained by no one since, which meant it was less a road than a suggestion scored into mountainside by generations of careful feet. Aragorn led with the confident navigation of someone who'd memorized topography the way scholars memorize texts, occasionally stopping to confirm landmarks that were increasingly difficult to identify under the unnatural frost. It was Stella who first noticed the grass. They'd entered a long meadow that in summer would have been alpine grassland, the kind of high, wind-swept space where tough vegetation adapted to short-growing seasons produced surprising beauty. In winter, it should have been dormant, brown and flattened under snow. Instead, the grass stood upright, each blade encased in ice so clear it looked like glass. "Don't touch it," Gandalf warned as Stella reached toward a cluster near the path. "Look at the edges." She pulled back and looked more carefully. The ice-encased blades were sharp, not metaphorically sharp, but genuinely edged, as if the freezing process had somehow refined the grass into something that could cut. Where wind had bent some blades against others, the contact points showed scoring marks. "Glass grass," Aragorn said, crouching to examine it without making contact. "I've heard of it. Always in old stories, always in places where magic went wrong. It's supposed to be impossible. Ice doesn't form like this naturally, and grass can't support this kind of crystalline structure without collapsing." "Nothing about this is natural," Gandalf said, studying the meadow with growing unease. The frost pattern wasn't random. There was geometry to it, as if the cold was following rules that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with intent. The white hunger is shaping the environment, creating conditions that serve its purpose. "Which is what?" Stella asked. "What does glass grass accomplish?" "It makes movement difficult," Aragorn observed, gesturing at the meadow ahead. "Look at the path. It's completely overgrown with this. We can't walk through it without cutting ourselves, probably badly. We either find a way around, which could add hours or days, or we find a way through that doesn't involve contact." Alfharin had been investigating the meadow's edge with cautious, systematic attention. Now he gave a short bark and moved left, away from the main path, following the tree line where the glass grass gave way to bare rock and stunted pine. "He's found something," Gandalf said, following. The wolf led them along the meadow's perimeter for perhaps 200 yards before stopping at what looked like a game trail, narrow, winding between boulders, but clear of the dangerous grass. Through their bond, Alfharin communicated, "Animals know. animals avoid. Follow animal path." "Good wolf," Gandalf murmured, and they proceeded single file along the trail, which was indeed clear not just of glass grass, but of frost entirely in places where rock overhang or dense pine provided shelter. Animals, what few remained active in this increasingly hostile environment, had found the safe route through trial and lethal error, and their collective wisdom was now keeping the humans alive. But even on the safe path, the environment continued to demonstrate its wrongness. Sound was wrong. Gandalf noticed it first when Aragorn's boot struck a loose stone and sent it clattering down the slope. The sound was too loud, sharp and clear, as if it had occurred directly beside them rather than 20 feet away. Then, mid-clatter, it simply stopped, not faded with distance as physics demanded, but ceased entirely, as if someone had closed a door on the noise. "Did you hear that?" Stella asked, her voice coming out strangely flat. "I heard it stop," Aragorn said. He spoke louder, deliberately projecting, testing. His voice carried normally for perhaps 10 feet, then vanished as if absorbed by invisible walls. "The air is fractured," Gandalf said, recognizing the pattern from certain kinds of weather magic, though never at this intensity or with this particular character. "Sound is traveling in cuts, normal propagation, then sudden voids where the medium itself has changed. It's like," he paused, searching for an analogy that made sense, "like trying to shout across a series of closed doors. Sometimes the door is open and sound passes. Sometimes it's closed and sound stops regardless of volume." "The White Hunger is doing this?" Stella asked. "Or it's a side effect of whatever's generating the White Hunger," Gandalf said. "Reality is thinning here. The normal rules that govern how air carries sound, how heat distributes, how ice forms, they're being overwritten by something else, something that has its own rules, its own logic, and that logic is fundamentally hostile to warmth and continuity." They continued along the game trail in increasingly oppressive silence, not the natural quiet of wilderness, but an enforced muteness where even their own footsteps became unpredictable, sometimes audible, sometimes vanishing into the acoustic voids that Gandalf had described. It was profoundly disorienting. Humans relied on sound to orient themselves in space, to judge distance and proximity, to maintain awareness of their companions. With sound behaving erratically, that spatial awareness dissolved. More than once, Stella turned suddenly to check that the others were still behind her, needing visual confirmation when auditory confirmation failed. Alfharin handled it better. Wolves relied less on sound than humans did, and his other senses compensated adequately. But even he showed signs of stress, ears constantly rotating, trying to make sense of the fractured acoustic environment, nose working overtime to maintain olfactory tracking of the group. They were perhaps halfway across the meadow when Gandalf spotted the boundary stones. 3 of them, arranged in a triangle that had clear intentionality, each stone carved with symbols that were badly weathered, but still readable if you knew what to look for. He did. "Stop," he said, and the word carried normally for once, reaching the others without void interference. They gathered around the stones while Gandalf traced the carvings with his finger, not quite touching. "Iron and crown," he said, "the cult's marker. This confirms we're on the correct approach to the seal site, the watchtower Aragorn's map indicated. These stones would have been placed recently, within the last year, marking the boundary of the cult's claimed territory." "Claimed how?" Aragorn asked. "Ritually, not legally," Stella explained. "The cult establishes symbolic ownership of a site before attempting to access it. They place markers, perform minor workings to attune themselves to the location's resonance, and build a kind of territorial relationship with the magic that's there. It makes the actual seal breaking easier because they've already established presence. So they've been here, Aragorn said, recently, and they knew about the tower before we did. Almost certainly, Gandalf agreed. The question is whether they've already attempted the seal or whether they're still preparing. The escaped chant leader from Blackwater Bridge, if they came here, if this was their fallback position after the ritual failed, they might be ahead of us. A sound interrupted this analysis, distant but unmistakable even through the acoustic fracturing. A bellow, low and grinding, like the sound of glaciers calving or mountains settling. It rolled through the valley in waves, and where it passed, the temperature dropped perceptibly. Alpharin's hackles rose immediately, his lips pulled back from his teeth, not in aggression but in the wolf equivalent of profound unease. Through their bond, Gandalf felt what the wolf was feeling. That sound was wrong in the same way the frozen hare had been wrong, the same way the unnamed traveler had been wrong. It was a sound that should not exist, made by something that violated natural law. The troll, Stella breathed. That's the ice troll. It has to be. You've heard of it before? Aragorn asked sharply. References, she said, always vague, always in the context of things the cult wanted to avoid awakening. The ice troll was described as a consequence, something that manifests when oath ice accumulates beyond a certain threshold. It's not summoned, it's not controlled, it just happens, like mold appearing on bread that's been left too long in the wrong conditions. Comforting, Aragorn said dryly. And it's between us and the tower? Probably not between us, Gandalf said, studying the valley's configuration. That sound came from the north-northwest. The tower is northeast from here. But the troll is near enough that our paths will intersect. And more importantly, if the cult is at the tower, they're using the troll the same way they used the bridge troll, as a defensive asset. They've agitated it, maybe fed it, certainly shaped the conditions to keep it active and territorial. Can we avoid it? Stella asked. Gandalf looked at the glass-grass meadow, at the fractured air, at the frost patterns that grew more geometric and intentional with each passing hour. I don't think we can, he said slowly. The white hunger is spreading from a source, and that source is either the troll itself or something the troll is connected to. Avoiding it means avoiding the tower, and avoiding the tower means abandoning the seal site to whatever the cult is doing there. Another bellow rolled through the valley, closer this time, or perhaps just more focused, the sound finding them through the acoustic chaos with what felt like deliberate intent. It knows we're here, Aragorn said. It knows something warm is here, Gandalf corrected. The white hunger feeds on warmth, breath, and resolve. We're all three. We're food, basically. Then we need to reach the tower before it reaches us, Aragorn said. How far? Gandalf consulted his memory of the maps, triangulated with the visible landmarks. 3 miles, maybe 4. Uphill, through terrain that's increasingly hostile. How long do we have? Gandalf looked at the sky, which had taken on a strange quality. Not darker exactly, but thicker, as if the air itself was becoming more substantial. Until dark, maybe less. Once night falls in this cold, movement becomes nearly impossible. We need to reach the tower, get inside, and secure it before the troll arrives. And if we can't? Stella asked. No one answered, because the answer was obvious and none of them wanted to say it aloud. They gathered their gear, checked their weapons, and prepared to move with the focused urgency of people who understood that the easy decisions were behind them, and everything ahead would require choices between bad options and worse ones. Alfharin took point again, nose low, finding the path through the glass grass that would keep them alive long enough to face whatever waited at the tower. Behind them, The glass grass caught the failing light and glittered like a field of knives. Ahead, the tower waited in shadow, and somewhere between, in the cold that grew with every step, the ice troll moved with the patient hunger of something that had never known hurry and had never needed to. They found shelter just as the light began its final descent toward night. Not the tower, which remained frustratingly out of reach beyond another ridge, but a way station of sorts, a small chapel or shrine built into the mountainside, half natural cave and half constructed stonework, the kind of place that predated current religions and served the more fundamental human need for a roof between traveler and sky. The entrance was a low arch, partly collapsed but still navigable, opening into a single chamber, perhaps 30 feet across. The roof was intact, mostly, and the walls showed old reliefs carved directly into the living rock. Figures in robes with their hands pressed over their mouths, eyes wide, expressions that managed to convey both reverence and terror. "A warning," Gandalf said, running his fingers along the nearest relief without quite touching it. The stone was cold, far colder than ambient temperature could explain. "These singers are silencing themselves, refusing to vocalize. This place was built to commemorate restraint, the wisdom of keeping certain songs unsung. Or it's a warning about what happens when you sing the wrong things," Stella added, studying a different panel where the figures' hands were being pulled away from their mouths by something indistinct, forces rendered as flowing lines that might have been wind or sound, or something that had no visual equivalent. "Look at their expressions in this sequence. They start voluntary, choosing silence. Then something compels them, forces them to sing despite knowing they shouldn't." Aragorn had been checking the chamber's practical aspects: exits, defensive positions, structural integrity. Now he stopped at the far corner and swore quietly. "Gandalf, you need to see this." The corner Aragorn had found was different from the rest of the chapel. Where the other walls showed ancient carving and natural stone, this section had been recently modified. Cult offerings arranged with deliberate care on a natural shelf in the rock. 3 wooden bowls, old but not ancient, containing materials that even at a glance made Gandalf's skin crawl. The first bowl held fat, rendered from some animal, now congealed and slightly rancid, but preserved enough by the cold to remain semi-solid. It had been salted heavily to the point where salt crystals formed a crust on the surface. The second bowl contained black wax, not candle wax, something denser and more resinous, molded into shapes that Gandalf recognized as simplified humanoid figures, crude but intentional. The third bowl held braids of hair, human hair, judging by the texture and length, in several different colors and ages, woven together into complex knots that formed patterns Gandalf couldn't immediately interpret, but which resonated with the same geometric wrongness as the cult's other ritual work. "Offerings," Stella said, her voice tight with controlled horror. "But not to petition or honor. These are lure offerings, bait. They're designed to attract something and keep it coming back." "The troll," Aragorn said. "Yes, the salted fat is food, not nutritional food, but magically significant. Fat represents stored warmth, stored life. Salt represents preservation, the refusal of decay. Together, they create a conceptual anchor for something that feeds on warmth and life, but exists in a state of eternal cold preservation." "And the wax figures?" Gandalf asked, though he was beginning to understand the answer. "Representations of the warmed," Stella explained. "Human shapes made in ritual materials to symbolize living people. The troll is being taught to associate these shapes with food, to recognize human presence as something to pursue and consume." "They're training it," Aragorn said, and his voice carried the particular flatness he adopted when confronted with cruelty that was systematic rather than impulsive. The same way you'd train a hunting dog or a guard animal. Reward it for approaching human-adjacent stimuli. Reinforce the association between people and feeding. Gandalf examined the offerings more closely without touching them. The arrangement was recent, within the last few days certainly. The fat hadn't separated completely, the wax still held detail, and the hair braids showed no weathering. Someone from the cult had been here very recently, maintaining the conditioning, keeping the troll agitated and focused. "How long does this kind of conditioning take?" Aragorn asked. "Months," Stella said. "Minimum. You can't train a predator this complex in a few weeks. The cult must have been working with the troll, or preparing the conditions for its manifestation, long before we disrupted the Blackwater Bridge ritual. Which means this wasn't a hasty backup plan," Gandalf concluded. "This was always part of their strategy. Multiple sites, multiple approaches, each one prepared in parallel, so that success at any single location would advance their larger objective." He stepped back from the offerings, mind working through implications. The cult's leadership was more organized and more patient than he'd given them credit for. They weren't desperate experimenters hoping for lucky breakthroughs. They were methodical, working from a comprehensive plan that anticipated setbacks and built-in redundancies. "We need to disrupt the offerings," Aragorn said. "Break the conditioning, remove the troll's food association." "Carefully," Gandalf warned. "These aren't just symbolic. They're magically active. I can feel the resonance from here. Destroying them carelessly could trigger a response, possibly alert the troll to our presence more effectively than leaving them alone would. Then what do we do?" Gandalf considered the options. They needed shelter. Night was falling, and the temperature was dropping to levels that would be genuinely dangerous without protection. The chapel offered the only viable refuge within reach, but staying here, surrounded by active cult magic designed to attract the very predator they were trying to avoid, was strategically terrible. Before he could decide, Stella made a small sound, not quite a gasp, more a sharp intake of breath that conveyed recognition and concern. She'd moved to a different section of the wall where someone had used chalk. Recently, the marks were still crisp, to inscribe a stanza in the old script. Gandalf joined her and read, "Take the breath, the warmth, the will. Keep the oath that breaks the still crown of ice and crown of stone. Make the singing flesh your own." "It's a variant," Stella said, her finger tracing the lines without touching the chalk. "A modified version of the crowning verse we saw at Blackwater Bridge. But this one isn't about transferring the key song's burden to substitutes. This one is about binding the singer's flesh directly to the cold, making the person who sings it into a vessel for the white hunger itself. A voluntary transformation," Gandalf said, understanding clicking into place. The cult isn't just trying to create singer-carriers who can use the key song. They're trying to create singer-carriers who are actively hybridized with the forces the seals contain, make them part human, part hunger. That way the singer doesn't just use the key song, they become a living component of it. "That's insane," Aragorn said. "Why would anyone volunteer for that?" "Because they believe," Stella said quietly. "Because the cult's ideology teaches that what's sealed is actually beneficial, and that merging with it is enlightenment rather than corruption. I've heard the senior members talk about becoming one with the true song. I always thought it was metaphorical, spiritual language. I didn't realize they meant it literally." A sound from outside the chapel, not the troll's bellow this time, but something subtler. The crack of ice forming rapidly, followed by a soft exhalation that might have been wind, but carried too much intentionality, too much presence. Alfharin, who had been investigating the chapel's perimeter, suddenly went rigid. His ears flattened, his lips pulled back from teeth in an expression that was no longer unease, but genuine fear. Through their bond, Gandalf felt what the wolf felt, cold approaching. Not weather cold, presence cold, the kind of cold that had weight and intention and hunger. "It's here," Gandalf said quietly, "or close enough that it doesn't matter. The troll has found us." Aragorn moved immediately to the entrance, keeping low, looking out into the gathering darkness. What he saw made him go very still. "Gandalf," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "The frost. Look at the frost." Gandalf joined him and looked. The frost that had been present all day, thick and geometric and wrong, was now spreading visibly. Not slowly, not with the gradual accumulation of natural ice formation, but fast, growing like a stain across the ground, up the rocks, over the sparse vegetation that remained. And where it spread, patterns emerged. Fingerprints, not metaphorical, actual fingerprints rendered in frost, as if something immense and barely tangible was pressing its hands against reality's surface and leaving impressions. The fingerprints were enormous, each individual print the size of a man's palm, the full handprint easily 6 feet across. They covered the ground in overlapping layers, creating a landscape of frozen touch that extended as far as the failing light allowed visibility. "It's marking territory," Stella breathed, "claiming this space, the same way animals mark with scent or claw marks. The troll is announcing that this area belongs to it now, and everything in it is subject to its hunger." A new cold settled over the chapel, not flowing in through the entrance but manifesting throughout the space simultaneously, as if the temperature had simply decided to drop 15 degrees in an instant. Breath fogged thick. Metal became painful to touch. The moisture in the air began to crystallize, creating a faint haze of ice particles that hung suspended like frozen fog. And through that haze, Gandalf heard it, a sound that wasn't quite vocalization and wasn't quite wind, a susurrus, a whisper, a collective exhalation that seemed to come from the stones themselves. It took him a moment to recognize what he was hearing, the chalked stanza, the modified crowning verse. It was being sung, not by human voices, not by anything that had lungs or vocal cords, but by the cold itself. The frost was vocalizing the verse, using the chapel's stone as a resonance chamber, turning architecture into instrument. Take the breath, the warmth, the will. The temperature dropped again. Stella's lips were going blue. Aragorn's fingers were stiffening. Alfharin's fur was collecting frost in visible layers. Gandalf made a decision. "We can't stay here," he said. "The chapel is compromised. The cult's conditioning has made it a lure, and staying means being caught in a trap that's already sprung. We need to reach the tower, now, in the dark, in the cold. It's our only chance." "We'll freeze before we get there," Aragorn said, stating fact rather than arguing. "We'll freeze faster if we stay here," Gandalf countered. He raised his staff, and light bloomed, warm, bright, defiant light that pushed back against the frost fog and filled the chapel with heat that felt like hope made tangible. "I'll hold the cold back as long as I can, but we need to move, right now." They gathered their gear with fumbling, frost-stiffened fingers. Stella could barely close her hand around her pack straps. Aragorn's sword had to be pried from its scabbard where ice had begun to seal it. Alfharin moved to the entrance and barked once, sharp, commanding, the wolf signal for "follow me, move fast, trust nothing." They emerged into darkness and cold that felt like malice given physical form. Behind them, the frozen chapel continued its terrible hymn, singing the cult's verse in a voice made of winter and hunger. Ahead, somewhere in the killing night, The tower waited, and between here and there, in the darkness that had grown teeth and hunger, the ice troll moved with the patience of something that had never doubted its prey would be delivered. The hunt had begun. They hadn't gone 100 yards from the chapel when the first pulse hit. Gandalf felt it before he understood what he was feeling, a sudden absence where warmth should have been, as if someone had opened a door in his chest and let winter pour directly into his lungs. The staff light he'd been maintaining flickered, dimmed, nearly went out before he forced power back into it, with an effort that left him breathless. Stella made a sound, half gasp, half sob, and stumbled. Aragorn caught her reflexively, then pulled his hand back with a sharp hiss. Where he'd gripped her arm, frost had formed instantly on his glove, and beneath the leather, his fingers had gone white with cold shock. "Don't touch each other," Gandalf managed, forcing words through a throat that felt lined with ice. "The cold is contagious. Physical contact spreads it." Alfharin was the worst affected. His breath came in painful, visible bursts, each exhalation a cloud of vapor that hung too long and too thick, as if the moisture in his lungs was trying to crystallize before it could leave his body. His paws slipped on ground that had been merely frosty a moment ago and was now glazed with black ice. He caught himself, adjusted his stance lower and wider, but the wolf's movements had lost their usual fluid grace. "What was that?" Aragorn demanded, scanning the darkness with eyes that were struggling to focus. The cold had made his vision blur, tears freezing at the corners of his eyes, creating distortions. "A pulse," Gandalf said, recognizing the pattern now. "The troll doesn't just radiate cold constantly, it attacks in waves, sudden bursts of heat theft that drain warmth from everything in range, like..." He searched for an analogy that would make sense, like a heart beating. But instead of pumping blood, it's pumping absence, pulling heat out of the world in rhythmic cycles. "How do we defend against it?" Stella asked. Her voice was shaking, not just from fear but from the physical effort of forcing frozen jaw muscles to form words. "Small fires," Gandalf said, already working. He spoke 3 words in the old tongue and gestured with his free hand, not at the air but at each of them individually. Small circles of warmth bloomed around them, not visible as flame, but perceptible as zones where the killing cold became merely brutal cold. "These won't stop the pulses, but they'll reduce the effect, keep you functional longer." "How much longer?" Aragorn asked. "I don't know," Gandalf admitted. "I've never fought anything like this. The warmth circles will hold as long as I can maintain them, but each pulse taxes them. Eventually they'll collapse or I'll run out of strength to sustain them, whichever comes first." Another pulse hit, faster than the first, as if the troll was accelerating its rhythm. The warmth circles flickered. Gandalf's vision grayed at the edges. Stella went to her knees, and Alfharin pressed against her, not for warmth, which they couldn't safely share, but for the animal comfort of presence, of not being alone in the cold. Gandalf forced the warmth circles to stabilize, drawing on reserves he'd been saving for the actual confrontation. This wasn't sustainable. If the pulses continued at this frequency, they wouldn't reach the tower. They wouldn't make it another quarter mile. "There," Aragorn said suddenly, pointing. Through the darkness and the frost fog that had begun to fill the air like frozen smoke, movement. Something tall. Something that moved with a deliberateness that had nothing to do with haste, because haste implied urgency, and urgency implied doubt. The ice troll didn't doubt. They saw it in fragments first. The coherent image was too large, too wrong to process all at once. A silhouette against slightly less dark sky. A shape that suggested humanoid proportions, but at a scale that made the comparison obscene. Details emerging as it moved closer. Not walking exactly, but flowing, as if it existed in a state somewhere between solid and liquid and chose solidity only when convenient. Then they saw it clearly, and Gandalf understood why the cult's texts had spoken of it with the particular horror reserved for things that violated fundamental categories. It was tall, 8 feet at minimum, possibly 9, difficult to judge precisely because its form seemed to fluctuate slightly, edges uncertain. Its body appeared to be constructed from ice and compacted snow, but not uniform ice. Layers were visible, outer shell of clear, crystalline ice that caught what little light existed and refracted it in ways that hurt to look at directly. Beneath that, packed snow, dirty gray and ancient-looking, and deeper still, visible through cracks and transparent sections, something else. Dark veins, like roots or blood vessels or waterlogged wood that had spent centuries at the bottom of a frozen lake. They ran through the troll's body in branching patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost designed, and they were moving, slow pulses that matched the rhythm of the cold attacks they'd been experiencing. The troll's face was the worst part. It had features, eyes, a mouth, the suggestion of a nose, but they were formed from absence rather than presence. The eyes were voids in the ice, perfectly black, that seemed to pull light into themselves and give nothing back. The mouth was a crack that went deeper than it should, revealing more darkness, more void, more nothing. And it was looking at them, not scanning the area, not searching randomly, looking directly at them with the focused attention of a predator that had identified specific prey and was now assessing the most efficient way to consume it. "Run," Gandalf said, not shouted. His voice came out barely above a whisper, throat too cold for volume, but the word carried absolute authority. The tower. Run. They ran, not in any organized way, not with tactical consideration or planned routes, simply ran, driven by the most fundamental survival instinct humans possessed, the knowledge that something large and hungry was behind them, and staying still meant death. The troll didn't chase, not immediately. It released another pulse instead. This one was stronger than the previous two, not just stealing heat, but actively projecting cold, creating a wave of freezing air that rolled over them like a physical force. Gandalf's warmth circles shattered. The temperature dropped so fast that the moisture in the air crystallized into tiny ice needles that hung suspended, creating a glittering, lethal fog. Stella's hair and eyelashes frosted over instantly. Aragorn's cloak stiffened, the fabric becoming rigid and brittle. Alfharin yelped, a sound of genuine pain, as frost formed on his nose and in his ears where tissue was thin and vulnerable. Gandalf tried to re-establish the warmth circles but couldn't gather the concentration. His mind was slowing, thoughts becoming sluggish, the cold affecting cognition directly. He forced himself forward through sheer will, staff raised like a walking stick, each step requiring conscious decision rather than automatic movement. Behind them, the troll began to move. Not running, it had no need to run, but following, flowing forward with that terrible liquid solidity, closing distance with the patient inevitability of winter itself. Aragorn was navigating by memory and desperate hope, choosing paths through the frost-covered rocks that led generally upward, generally toward where the tower should be. But the darkness and the frost fog made navigation nearly impossible. Landmarks disappeared. Distance became uncertain. They could have been 50 yards from safety or a mile. There was no way to know. Another pulse, weaker this time. Or perhaps they were simply becoming numb enough that the effect felt less dramatic. Gandalf realized with cold clarity that the numbness was not an improvement. It meant they were losing the fight at a cellular level, their body's ability to register and respond to cold damage breaking down. Alfharin stumbled, recovered, stumbled again. The wolf's legs were stiffening, the joints freezing in ways that canine physiology was never meant to endure. Through their bond, Gandalf felt the wolf's determination overriding pain and limitation, but determination had physical limits, and they were reaching them. "There!" Aragorn shouted, or tried to shout. The word came out cracked and hoarse, but he was pointing ahead where a shape loomed against the sky. Rectangular, vertical, man-made. The tower. They were close, desperately, impossibly close. But the troll was closer. It had angled its approach, not following directly behind, but moving to cut them off, to position itself between them and the tower. And as it moved, the frost spread ahead of it, a carpet of killing cold that advanced faster than they could run, creating barriers of ice, filling the air with frozen particles that were becoming difficult to breathe. Gandalf made a decision. He stopped running, turned, and raised his staff. "Keep going," he ordered. "Get to the tower. I'll hold it." "You can't," Aragorn began. "I can hold it long enough," Gandalf interrupted. "Get Stella to the tower. Get inside. I'll follow." It was a lie. They all knew it was a lie. But Aragorn also knew that arguing would waste the seconds Gandalf was buying them. He grabbed Stella's arm despite the cold contact danger and pulled her forward. Alfharin hesitated, torn between pack loyalty to Gandalf and the command implicit in the wizard's stance. "Go," Gandalf said gently to the wolf. "Protect them. I'll be fine." Another lie, but a necessary one. Alfharin went, limping now, following Aragorn and Stella toward the tower's dark silhouette. Gandalf turned to face the ice troll alone. It had stopped advancing and now stood perhaps 30 feet away, regarding him with those void eyes that held no expression, and somehow conveyed absolute confidence. It knew it would win. It had always won. Cold was patient, and heat was temporary, and in the end, winter claimed everything. Gandalf raised his staff higher and spoke. Not a word of power. He didn't have the strength left for that. Just his name, his own name, spoken clearly and deliberately into the cold and the dark. An assertion of identity against the unnamed hunger. A declaration that he was here, he was real, he was warm and alive and would not be easily taken. The troll released another pulse. Gandalf met it with fire. The tower wasn't locked. This should have been Aragorn's first warning that something was wrong, but he was too cold and too focused on getting Stella inside to properly register the significance. The door, ancient wood banded with iron that had turned black with age, swung open under his half-frozen hand with the smooth ease of something recently oiled and maintained. Recently, by someone. He pulled Stella through the entrance, and Alfharin followed immediately, the wolf collapsing just inside the threshold, with a whimper that spoke of exhaustion and pain in equal measure. Aragorn forced the door closed against wind that fought back with what felt like intentionality, then braced it with the iron bar that was, conveniently, suspiciously, positioned exactly where it should be. Only then did he turn and actually look at the interior. The tower's ground floor was a single circular chamber perhaps 40 feet across. The walls were stone, ancient and solid, but reinforced with iron straps that ran horizontally around the circumference in bands spaced every 3 feet. The straps weren't decorative. They were structural, holding the stonework together with an engineering precision that spoke of builders who understood that this place needed to withstand more than weather. Hence the name in the old records, the Keep of Iron Crown. The iron bands gave the tower the appearance of being wrapped in dark metal rings, like a crown's circlet multiplied and stacked. A staircase curved up the inner wall, leading to upper floors that Aragorn couldn't see from this angle. In the chamber's center, a fire pit, currently cold but recently used, ashes still showing distinct pieces rather than being completely reduced to powder, and against the far wall, clearly visible even in the minimal light filtering through narrow windows, cult markings, fresh chalk, precise geometry, the iron and crown symbol rendered large and careful. "They've been here," Stella said, her voice shaking but functional. The interior of the tower was cold, far colder than a structure this solid should be, but it was warmer than outside, and the absence of wind made the temperature feel almost tropical by comparison. Recently, maybe they're still here. Aragorn drew his sword, though his half-frozen hand made the grip uncertain. "Upper floors, check for occupants, but carefully, we're in no condition to fight." A massive impact against the door made them both jump. The iron bar held, but the wood groaned and frost began to spread across its surface from the outside, creating flower-like patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't indicators of the death pressing against the barrier. The troll was here. "Gandalf," Stella breathed, moving toward the door as if to open it. "Don't," Aragorn commanded, grabbing her shoulder. "He told us to get inside. Opening that door now wastes what he's buying us. He can't fight that thing alone. He's not trying to fight it. He's trying to delay it. There's a difference." Aragorn's voice was harsh, not from anger but from the effort of saying what needed to be said, despite every instinct screaming to help their companion. "Gandalf is keeping it occupied so we can search this tower, find whatever the cult was after, and prepare. When he gets inside, and he will get inside, we need to have something useful ready." Another impact. The door held, but barely. Frost was now covering the entire interior surface, and the iron bar was beginning to show stress fractures. "The vault," Stella said suddenly. "The old records mentioned a vault. If this tower was a seal site, if the cult came here for a Keysong fragment, there should be a chamber somewhere that's specifically designed to hold it." "Where?" Aragorn asked. "Down, not up. Vaults are always down, underground, protected by stone and earth. There should be access somewhere on this floor." They searched rapidly, Alfharin helping despite his injuries, the wolf's nose more reliable than their eyes in the dim light. It was the wolf who found it, a section of floor near the eastern wall where the stones were slightly different, newer or perhaps just replaced more recently, creating a rectangular outline that suggested a hatch or trap door. Aragorn found the release mechanism, a ring set flush with the stone, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. He pulled, and a section of floor lifted on counterweighted hinges, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. Cold air rolled up from below. Not the killing cold of the troll outside, but the stored cold of deep earth and old stone, the kind that existed independent of weather. "Down there," Stella said. "The vault is down there." A tremendous crash, the tower door splintering, the iron bar breaking with a sound like a bell cracking. Cold flooded into the chamber, and through the broken door they could see it. The ice troll forcing entry, too large for the door frame but compressing itself, flowing through the opening like water through a crack. And behind the troll, visible for just a moment in the frost-lit darkness, Gandalf, still on his feet, staff raised, surrounded by the remnants of fire that was losing its fight against the cold. "Go!" Aragorn shouted, pushing Stella toward the stairs. "Down, now!" She went, stumbling on the steep steps. Alfharin followed with the desperate agility of an animal that knew retreat was survival. Aragorn went last, pulling the trapdoor closed behind him as the troll entered the tower fully and the temperature in the upper chamber plummeted to levels where stone itself began to crack from thermal shock. The stairs were steep and narrow, carved directly into bedrock, descending in a tight spiral that made footing treacherous. No light, no handrails. just cold stone and darkness, and the sound of their own breathing echoing in the confined space. They descended for what felt like minutes but was probably less than one. Then the stairs ended, opening into a chamber that was somehow visible despite having no obvious light source, a faint, pervasive glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The vault. It was smaller than Aragorn had expected, perhaps 15 feet square, with a low ceiling that made the space feel compressed. The walls were covered in carved grooves, and it took him a moment to recognize what he was seeing. Musical measures. The grooves were shaped like notation, like the written form of song, running in complex patterns across all four walls and the ceiling. A place to hold a song fragment as an object, not metaphorically but literally, as if music could be made physical and stored like a book. In the chamber's center, on a stone pedestal, a reliquary, small, unadorned, made of dark metal that might have been iron or might have been something else that looked like iron. The lid was open. Stella approached it carefully, as if expecting traps or wards. But there was nothing, just the reliquary, open and waiting. Inside, on a bed of dark cloth, a thin strip of metal, perhaps 4 inches long and an inch wide. Engraved on its surface were markings that looked like notation, but were also readable as runes, depending on how you focused your eyes. A true keysong fragment, Stella breathed. Not an echo, not a copy. This is actual notation from the original song, the one the seals were designed to contain. How can music be an object? Aragorn asked, moving closer despite every tactical instinct telling him to maintain perimeter awareness. Because at the level the keysong operates, there's no difference between sound and substance, Stella explained. She reached toward the fragment but didn't touch it. Song is vibration. Vibration is movement. Movement is energy. Energy is matter. The fragment exists at all those levels simultaneously. It's notation and sound and power and object all at once. Can we take it? Aragorn asked. We have to take it, Stella said. If the cult gets this, they can use it to break the seal at this site. But taking it carelessly could trigger a resonance. The fragment wants to be sung, wants to complete itself. If I touch it wrong, if I lift it without proper preparation, it might ring the entire tower and amplify any nearby magical effects. Including the troll, Aragorn said grimly. Especially the troll. The white hunger is essentially frozen song. Oath ice crystallized around wrong music. A true fragment this powerful could amplify it exponentially. From above, the sound of destruction, stone breaking, iron bands groaning, the troll forcing its way deeper into the tower. It had entered the upper chamber. Now it was searching, methodical and patient, working through the space with the terrible efficiency of something that had infinite time and absolute confidence. How long to prepare? Aragorn asked. I don't know, Stella admitted. I've read about this in theory, but never. A new sound from above. Footsteps. Human footsteps. Running. Rapid and desperate. Then Gandalf's voice, muffled by stone but still audible. The stairs. Where are the stairs? Aragorn moved immediately, crossing to the vault's entrance and shouting upward. Here, follow my voice. Gandalf appeared at the top of the stairs, visible as a silhouette against the cold glow from the upper chamber. He was moving with visible effort, frost covering his robes, his staff dim, but he was moving. He descended with the controlled falling of someone whose legs were no longer entirely reliable, caught himself on the walls, kept coming. He made it to the vault floor just as the trapdoor above exploded inward. Not broken by force, but frozen so thoroughly that it shattered like glass when the troll's hand pressed against it. Cold poured down the stairs in a visible wave. The fragment, Gandalf gasped. his breath coming in painful bursts. "Tell me you found it." "We found it," Stella confirmed, "but I don't know how to take it safely." Gandalf looked at the reliquary, at the fragment, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition, understanding, and a kind of weary resignation that came from knowing what needed to be done and knowing it would cost more than they could easily afford. "There's no safe way," he said. "The fragment wants to be used. Taking it will ring the tower and amplify the troll, but leaving it means the cult gets it eventually. So we take it and fight an amplified troll," Aragorn said, "inside a tower that's already structurally compromised by cold." "Yes," Gandalf agreed. "Unless you have a better plan." Aragorn looked at the stairs, at the cold pouring down them, at Alfharin, who was shivering violently despite the wolf's fur. "I have a worse plan," he said, "which under the circumstances might make it the best plan we have." From above, the sound of the troll beginning its descent, massive impacts on the stairs, stone cracking, the temperature dropping with each second. "Tell me quickly," Gandalf said. "We lure the troll down here," Aragorn explained, words coming fast. "Into the vault. It's a confined space. The troll will have to compress itself to fit, which should limit its movement. The walls are carved with musical notation, sympathetic magic, designed to resonate with song fragments. If we can trigger the fragment's resonance deliberately, in a controlled way, inside a chamber that's built to channel and focus that kind of power, we turn the vault into a weapon," Stella finished, understanding. "The fragment amplifies the troll, yes, but the vault amplifies the fragment. The resonance feeds back on itself. If we can time it right, if we can create a harmonic peak at exactly the right moment, the troll becomes part of the resonance instead of controlling it," Gandalf said. "It gets caught in its own amplified frequency. The oath ice that makes up its core shatters from sympathetic vibration." "That's the theory," Aragorn said. "The practice involves all of us being in the vault when it happens." "Which will kill us," Stella pointed out. "Which might kill us," Aragorn corrected, "depending on whether Gandalf can shield us from the resonance while still letting it affect the troll." They looked at Gandalf. The wizard looked at his staff, at the dim light struggling to remain lit, at his hands that were shaking from cold and exhaustion. Then he looked at Alfharin, who met his gaze with amber eyes that held trust and loyalty and absolute faith. "I can do it," Gandalf said. "Maybe, but we need the troll in position first, and we need Stella ready to trigger the fragment at my signal." The troll's footsteps on the stairs grew louder, closer. The cold intensified until breathing became painful. "Positions," Aragorn ordered. "Stella, the fragment. Gandalf, whatever you're going to do for shielding, start preparing. Alfharin." The wolf moved without being told, positioning himself at the vault's entrance, low and ready. Not to attack, the wolf knew better than to try biting ice, but to draw attention, to make the troll focus on the right target at the right moment. The cold reached the vault floor. Frost spread across the walls, following the carved musical grooves, creating patterns of ice that looked like frozen song. At the top of the stairs, backlit by the cold glow from above, the ice troll appeared. Its void eyes found them. It began its descent. The plan, desperate, improvised, with a dozen ways to fail and only one narrow path to success, was in motion. The troll descended the stairs with a liquid patience that was somehow more terrifying than speed would have been. It was too large for the stairwell. That much was immediately obvious. A creature of its bulk should have become wedged, trapped by simple geometry. But the ice troll didn't obey simple geometry. It compressed itself, flowing like water, finding a path through rock, its form becoming narrower and taller as it negotiated the tight spiral. Ice scraped against stone with a sound like knives on glass. "How long do you need?" Aragorn asked Stella, his voice low but carrying clearly in the vault's confined space. She was crouched beside the reliquary, hands hovering over the fragment without touching it, eyes closed in concentration. "To prepare the resonance trigger? 2 minutes, maybe 3. I need to identify the fragment's natural frequency first. If I activate it on the wrong harmonic, the feedback could collapse inward instead of projecting outward." "You have 1 minute," Gandalf said, not cruelly but with the absolute certainty of someone who could hear what was coming and knew exactly how much time they had. "After that, the troll will be in the vault and preparation time becomes irrelevant." Stella's eyes snapped open. 1 minute isn't enough. "Then work faster," Gandalf said. He was positioning himself at the vault's center, staff raised, already beginning to weave the protective working that would, theoretically, shield them from the resonance that would, theoretically, destroy the troll. His hands were shaking badly now, frost forming on his beard and eyebrows, but his voice remained steady. "Aragorn, when the troll enters, you need to keep it focused on the vault's center, away from Stella, away from me while I'm building the shield. Can you do that?" "I can try," Aragorn said, drawing his sword. The blade was so cold it had started to frost along the edges, creating a white rime that looked almost decorative if you ignored the fact that it represented the weapon's material structure being compromised. "What do I use for bait?" "Movement," Gandalf said. "Heat, life, anything that represents what it feeds on. The troll is a predator of warmth. Give it the largest heat signature and it will orient toward that." Aragorn understood immediately. He sheathed his sword, no point trying to fight with a weapon that might shatter on impact, and instead pulled a small oil flask from his pack. Field supply, meant for maintaining weapons and waterproofing leather. He uncorked it and poured the contents over a strip of cloth torn from his cloak, then wrapped the oil-soaked fabric around his left forearm. "Gandalf, I need light," he said. The wizard flicked his staff without looking, and a tongue of flame, small, controlled, carefully rationed, jumped to the oilcloth. It caught immediately, burning with the bright intensity of concentrated fuel. Aragorn now had a torch strapped to his arm. Painful, already he could feel the heat through his sleeve, uncomfortably close to actual burning, but visible, bright, radiating warmth in a space that was otherwise dominated by cold. The largest heat signature in the vault, exactly what a predator of warmth would focus on. The troll reached the bottom of the stairs. It paused at the vault's entrance, and for a moment Aragorn thought it might not enter, might recognize the trap, might demonstrate enough intelligence to refuse the confined space. But then he remembered what Stella had said. The cult had been conditioning this creature for months, teaching it to pursue human presence, rewarding it for aggression. The troll had been trained to enter exactly this kind of space. It flowed through the entrance, compressing further, becoming a column of ice and frozen purpose that filled the doorway completely before expanding back to its full size once inside. 8 feet tall in a vault with a 7-foot ceiling meant the troll had to hunch, its head and shoulders pressed against the carved stone overhead. The musical grooves in the ceiling filled with ice immediately, frost spreading along the notation patterns like frozen sound. Its void eyes found Aragorn's torch, fixed on it, recognized warmth, heat, prey. It moved toward him with terrifying suddenness, not flowing now but lunging, one massive arm sweeping in an arc designed to crush or freeze or both. Aragorn dove left, rolling under the blow, feeling displaced air so cold it burned exposed skin. He came up on the vault's opposite side, torch still lit, still the brightest thing in the space. The troll reoriented immediately, tracking the heat, and Aragorn understood with cold clarity that this was going to be his role for however long they had. Moving target, heat bait, staying alive just long enough for Stella to work and Gandalf to shield. He could do this, probably, if he didn't make mistakes. If the troll didn't get lucky, if his legs didn't freeze before his time ran out. The troll attacked again, both arms this time, trying to trap him against the wall. Aragorn dropped flat, the frozen limbs passing over him with inches to spare, impacting the stone wall hard enough to crack it. Frost spread from the impact points in radiating patterns. He rolled away, gained his feet, kept the torch high and visible. "Come on," he thought at the troll. "Follow the warmth. Stay focused on me." The troll obliged. Behind the creature, near the reliquary, where she was partially hidden by the troll's bulk, Stella worked with desperate speed. Her hands moved in precise gestures over the fragment, not touching but tracing patterns in the air above it. She was humming, barely audible under the sounds of combat, but Gandalf's trained ear caught it, a rising and falling tone, searching for resonance, feeling for the frequency where the fragment wanted to respond. Gandalf, meanwhile, was building the shield, working with a complexity and speed that should have been impossible even for someone of his skill. It wasn't a physical barrier, nothing that would block the troll's attacks or prevent movement. It was a frequency barrier, a selective filter that would allow certain vibrations to pass through while blocking others, in theory. He'd never actually constructed one at this scale, at this speed, under combat conditions while half frozen. The technical challenges were considerable. The likelihood of failure was high, but the alternative was accepting that the ice troll would kill them all and the cult would retrieve the fragment unopposed. So failure wasn't really an option available for consideration. The shield took shape around him as a barely visible shimmer in the air, like heat distortion but inverted. Cold distortion, a warping of space that indicated something fundamental was being altered at the level where physics and magic intersected. Alfharin had positioned himself near Gandalf, not participating in the combat, but ready to intervene if the troll's attention shifted away from Aragorn. The wolf was shivering constantly now, frost building up in his fur despite his body heat. But his amber eyes remained focused and aware. Through their bond, Gandalf felt the wolf's question, how much longer? Not long, Gandalf thought back. One way or another, this ends soon. Aragorn was tiring. The ranger's movements were still precise, still effective, but slower. Reaction time degrading as the cold affected muscle response and nerve conduction. The torch on his arm was burning lower, consuming the oilcloth, giving him perhaps another 30 seconds of bright flame before it guttered. When the flame died, the troll would lose its primary target lock. It would reassess, find other heat sources, find Stella, find Gandalf. 20 seconds of flame remaining. "Stella," Gandalf said, voice tight with effort. "Status." "Almost," she said, and her humming had changed. No longer searching but locked, matching a frequency she'd found in the fragment. "I have the resonance. I can trigger it. But I don't know what happens when I do. This could be subtle, or it could be catastrophic." "Catastrophic is what we need," Gandalf said. "Trigger on my mark. 3 count. Aragorn, when I say 3, get behind me. Fast." "Understood," Aragorn managed, dodging another sweep of the troll's arm that came so close he felt ice form on his cheek from proximity alone. 15 seconds of flame. The troll was learning. Its attacks were becoming more predictive, anticipating where Aragorn would dodge rather than simply reacting to where he was. The next strike would probably connect. After that, the fight would be over. 10 seconds. 1. Gandalf said. Stella's hands moved to hover directly over the fragment, fingers positioned in a specific configuration that Gandalf recognized from musical conducting, the gesture for a fortissimo strike, a command for maximum resonance. The troll attacked, both arms converging from opposite sides, a pincer movement designed to eliminate dodge options. Aragorn had one choice, straight up. He jumped, got his hands on the troll's converging arms, used them as a vault, flipped over the creature's head in a move that was more desperation than acrobatics. He landed badly, stumbled, caught himself. The torch flame was guttering. 5 seconds. 2, Gandalf said. The shield working snapped into full stability around him, a sphere of altered frequency that encompassed Stella, Alfharin, and enough space for Aragorn if he could reach it in time. The troll turned toward its escaped prey, but slower now, as if some part of its predator instinct recognized that something had changed in the vault's dynamics. The musical grooves carved into the walls and ceiling were beginning to glow. Faint phosphorescence, responding to Stella's resonance work even before she'd triggered the fragment itself. 3 seconds of flame. 3! Gandalf shouted. Aragorn ran straight toward Gandalf, diving into the sphere of warped air just as the torch flame died completely. The troll lunged after him, massive and fast despite its size, and Stella touched the fragment. The fragment sang, not with voice or instrument, but with a purity of tone that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. A crystalline note that bypassed hearing entirely and resonated directly in bone, in the cavities of the skull, in the spaces between thoughts where sound became something more fundamental than mere vibration. The vault responded immediately. Every carved groove in the walls and ceiling, those musical measures inscribed into living stone, lit up with brilliant blue-white luminescence. The patterns weren't decorative. They were amplifiers, resonators, sympathetic chambers designed specifically for this purpose, to take a fragment of the key song and multiply its power until it filled every cubic inch of space. The fragment's single note hit the carved patterns and became a chord, then a harmony, then a full chorus of sound that had physical weight, that pressed against skin and made breathing difficult. Inside Gandalf's shield sphere, the effect was muted, reduced to bearable levels by the frequency barrier the wizard had constructed. But even filtered, the power was staggering. Aragorn could feel it in his teeth, in his chest, in the way his heartbeat seemed to synchronize involuntarily with the resonance. Outside the shield, the ice troll experienced the full force. The creature's reaction was immediate and violent. Its form, which had maintained coherence despite its fluid movements, began to destabilize. The outer shell of clear crystalline ice started vibrating at a frequency visible to the naked eye, oscillating so rapidly it blurred. Hairline cracks appeared across its surface, spreading from extremities toward the core with the branching pattern of lightning frozen in glass. The troll staggered, its movements losing their terrible grace. It swung one massive arm, not at Aragorn this time, but at the walls themselves, trying to destroy the carved grooves, to silence the resonance that was tearing it apart. The impact shattered stone, but the grooves ran too deep, covered too much surface area. Destroying them all would require destroying the entire vault. A sound emerged from the troll, not the grinding bellow they'd heard before, but something higher, more complex. Almost speech, but in a language composed of winter and void rather than words. The sound of something that had never experienced pain, learning what agony meant. The sound of eternal cold, discovering that eternity could end. "It's working," Stella said, her voice tight with effort as she maintained contact with the fragment. Her hands hovered over the metal strip, fingers making minute adjustments to the resonance trigger, fine-tuning the frequency. The outer layers are breaking down, but the core, look at the core. Gandalf could see what she meant. Through the increasingly fractured outer ice, the dark veins that ran through the troll's body remained intact. The oath ice, the frozen consequence of broken promises, the crystallized burden theft that formed the creature's essential nature, was resisting the fragment's song. "The core is too dense," Gandalf said, maintaining his shield working with hands that shook from effort and cold. "Too old, too compressed. The resonance is destroying the shell but not reaching the center." The troll lurched forward, no longer attacking with strategy, but simply trying to reach them through pure mass and momentum. Its form was coming apart with each step, chunks of ice sloughing off, the clear crystalline surface fracturing into smaller and smaller pieces. But the dark core held, and as long as it held, the troll remained fundamentally alive, fundamentally dangerous. It crashed against Gandalf's shield sphere with the full weight of its disintegrating body. The barrier held, barely. Gandalf gasped as the impact translated into feedback through the working, the magical structure absorbing kinetic energy it hadn't been designed to handle. His knees buckled. The staff's light flickered. "Amplify the fragment," he commanded through gritted teeth. "We need more resonance. The core has to shatter." "If I amplify further, your shield might collapse," Stella warned. "The frequencies could interfere." "The shield will hold," Gandalf said with absolute conviction, though whether he actually believed it or was simply refusing to consider alternatives wasn't clear. "Amplify. Maximum output. Do it now." Stella's hands moved in a sharp, decisive gesture, no longer requesting power from the fragment, but demanding it, pulling from it with the authority of someone who understood its nature completely. The fragment responded. The song didn't become louder. Volume was irrelevant at this level of resonance. Instead, it became more present, more real, as if it was transitioning from sound into a fundamental property of reality itself. The air thickened with it. Light bent around it. The vault's stone walls groaned as the vibrations stressed molecular bonds that had remained stable for centuries, and the oath-ice core of the troll began to resonate, not in harmony, in opposition. Two frequencies fighting for dominance in the same physical space, and where they met, the troll's body tore itself apart from the inside out. The dark veins, visible through the fractured outer shell, began to glow with a sickly pale light. Then they cracked. Fracture lines spread through the core itself, following the branching pattern that had defined the troll's internal structure. The creature tried to scream, but its form was too damaged. The sound that emerged was broken, fragmented, a dozen different tones that didn't harmonize but created instead a discordant shriek that hurt to hear. Even through Gandalf's filtering, more of the troll came apart. One massive arm shattered completely, not broken off but disintegrated into a cloud of ice crystals that hung in the air like frozen fog. The legs developed multiple fracture points, barely supporting the torso's diminishing weight, but the void eyes remained, fixed, aware, and in those absolute black depths, Aragorn saw something he hadn't expected to see in a creature of pure cold and hunger: recognition, understanding. The troll knew it was dying, knew what was killing it, and in its final moments, it wanted revenge. The creature gathered itself, pulling what remained of its fragmenting form together through sheer force of will, and lunged. Not at Gandalf, who was clearly protected, not at Aragorn, who had proven difficult to catch, at Stella, who held the fragment, who was the source of its destruction. The movement was fast, despite the troll's damaged state, desperately, terminally fast. Alfharin moved faster. The wolf had been conserving strength, holding position within the shield sphere, waiting. Now he exploded into motion with every ounce of speed and power his exhausted, frost-damaged body could generate. He hit the troll from the side, not trying to stop it, that would have been impossible, but redirecting it, changing its trajectory by targeting the largest fracture line in its deteriorating structure. 60 pounds of wolf traveling at maximum velocity struck exactly where the troll's arm had been, where the ice was thinnest, where the stress fractures had already compromised integrity. The impact was perfectly timed, perfectly placed. The crack widened explosively. The troll's lunge became a tumble, its trajectory shifting from forward toward Stella to sideways and down. The massive body crashed into the vault floor with a sound like a glacier calving, and the impact finished what the resonance had started. The oath ice core shattered, not slowly, all at once. A catastrophic structural failure that reduced the troll's center from coherent solid to fragmentary dust in the space between heartbeats. But even dying, even in the final instant of its existence, the troll released one last attack, a pulse of cold so profound it went beyond temperature into something conceptual. The frozen consequence of every broken oath, every stolen burden, every wrong song ever sung, condensed into a single exhalation of absolute negation. The white hunger, pure and undiluted. It hit Alfharin directly. The wolf, still mid-motion from his attack, froze. Instantly, completely, not gradually overcome by cold, but simply stopped, as if someone had paused time itself, but only for him. The amber eyes remained open, mid-blink. The muscles remained tensed, mid-stride. Everything that made Alfharin a living creature, breath, heartbeat, the electrical firing of neurons that generated consciousness, simply ceased. He fell, but it was the fall of an object obeying gravity rather than a creature losing balance. Hit the stone floor and didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't respond to his name when Gandalf, breaking every tactical protocol about maintaining magical workings during crisis, abandoned his shield and dropped to his knees beside the wolf's still form. "Alfharin," Gandalf said, quietly first, then louder, as if volume could bridge the gap that had just opened. "Alfharin!" Through the bond, the connection that had existed between them for years, that carried wordless communication and unconditional trust, Gandalf felt nothing. Not pain, not fear, not the wolf's dying thoughts, nothing. As if the other end of the bond had simply ceased to exist. The troll's body finished disintegrating, the broken core turning to powder, the outer shell fragmenting into progressively smaller pieces until what remained was just ordinary ice, mundane and harmless. The fragment's song ended. The vault's resonance faded. Silence returned. Oppressive, complete, wrong in the way silence is wrong when it should be filled with breathing that isn't happening. Gandalf's hands moved over the wolf's body with desperate precision, checking for signs of life that increasingly, obviously, weren't there. No breath, no pulse. The fur still soft, the body still warm from recent exertion, but underneath, nothing. The essential animating force that made this collection of flesh and bone into Alfharin was simply gone, taken by the white hunger. Stella had moved away from the reliquary, still clutching the fragment in hands that bled from the resonance work. But she wasn't looking at her injuries. She was staring at Gandalf and the wolf, her expression showing the particular horror of someone who understood exactly what had been lost. Aragorn approached slowly, giving space but maintaining presence. He'd seen grief before, recognized its forms, knew that what happened in the next moments would determine whether the person experiencing it would break, harden, or find some third path that allowed continued function. "Gandalf," he said quietly, not asking questions, not offering comfort, just establishing, you are not alone in this. Gandalf didn't respond immediately. His hands remained on Alpharin's head, as if touch could somehow restore what touch had no power over. Then, slowly, with visible effort, he withdrew his hands and stood. "The troll is neutralized," he said. His voice was steady, controlled with iron discipline. Grief locked away in some internal chamber to be dealt with later, when dealing with it wouldn't compromise survival. "The fragment is secured. We need to clear the rest of the tower and establish defensible positions before the cult investigates the disturbance." "Gandalf," Stella began. "We need to move," he interrupted, and the flatness in his voice made it clear this wasn't open for discussion. "Alfharin is beyond help. The living are not. We focus on the living." It was brutal. It was also tactically correct. And it was Gandalf protecting himself the only way he knew how, by converting grief into mission focus before grief could render him ineffective. He removed his gray traveling cloak and laid it carefully over the wolf's still form, covering Alfharin completely, a final gesture of care for something that would receive no more care. Then he turned toward the stairs and started walking. Chapter 8. Revised Complete. 6,003 characters with spaces. The tower's upper levels were empty, not abandoned, empty in the way places are empty when occupants have left recently and in haste. The second floor showed signs of habitation, bedrolls arranged in a defensive circle, a cold fire pit with ashes still showing distinct charcoal pieces, supply packs leaning against walls with their contents partially unpacked. Aragorn examined one of the packs with the systematic attention of someone trained to read evidence. "Cult supplies," he confirmed, pulling out items for inspection. "Black wax candles, salt, rope that's been knotted in ritual patterns. And this?" He held up a leather journal, its cover marked with the iron and crown symbol. "Records, possibly valuable." "How many?" Gandalf asked. He was examining the bedrolls, counting, assessing. 5 bedrolls, Aragorn said. 5 packs, so probably a 5-person team. The chant leader from Blackwater Bridge plus 4 others. They were here as recently as this morning. The ashes are cold but not wind-scattered, and there's no dust accumulation on the supplies. "Where did they go?" Stella wondered, moving to one of the narrow windows that looked out over the valley below. Full night had fallen now, and the darkness was profound. No moon visible through the heavy cloud cover, no stars, just blackness that seemed to press against the window like a physical thing. "They heard the troll die," Gandalf said, "or felt it. The resonance we triggered would have been perceptible for miles to anyone with magical sensitivity. They knew their defensive asset had been neutralized, knew someone had successfully entered the vault and retrieved the fragment. So they ran. Or they're preparing an ambush," Aragorn countered, falling back to a more defensible position, regrouping, planning a counterstrike. "Possible," Gandalf acknowledged, "but unlikely. The cult's strength is in ritual preparation, in controlled conditions and carefully constructed workings. Improvised combat isn't their methodology. If they've lost the vault and the fragment, their most logical move is retreat, fall back to another prepared site, and attempt the seal breaking there." He moved to the chamber's center, where the cult had arranged a secondary ritual circle, smaller than the ones they'd seen at previous sites, but following the same geometric principles. Chalk lines on stone, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly, that seemed to twist space in ways that made distance uncertain. "This is a transfer circle," Stella said, recognizing the configuration. "Not for summoning or binding, for moving objects or people from one location to another. It requires an anchor point at the destination and significant power to activate. but it allows near instantaneous travel. So they left by magic, Aragorn said. That explains the haste. They didn't need to physically pack and descend the mountain. They just activated the circle and vanished. Which means they could return the same way, Gandalf pointed out. If they have the power and the motivation. We're not secure here just because the immediate area is clear. He turned away from the circle and moved to the room's far side, where a crude map had been chalked onto the wall. A network of locations marked with symbols, connected by lines that suggested relationships or sequence. 6 locations, 6 iron and crown symbols. Blackwater Bridge was marked, a line drawn through it, indicating completion or compromise. The Iron Crown Tower showed a different mark, a circle with a diagonal slash, probably meaning attempted but failed. 4 other sites remained unmarked, still active, still potential targets. 6 more sites, Gandalf said quietly, tracing the map with his finger. The cult leader at Blackwater Bridge told us there were 6 more. This confirms it. They have at least 4 fully prepared locations where they can attempt the same seal-breaking ritual we've disrupted twice now. Can we stop them? Stella asked. 4 sites, and we're 3 people. 2 people now. She caught herself, the reality of Alfharin's loss surfacing despite everyone's tactical focus. We can't be everywhere simultaneously. No, Gandalf agreed. We can't stop them everywhere. But we don't need to. We need to understand what they're actually trying to accomplish and stop that. He moved back to the ritual circle, studying it with the focused intensity he brought to complex magical problems. The cult isn't just trying to break seals randomly. They're working toward a specific configuration, a pattern of breaks that will create a larger opening. Like removing specific stones from an arch so the whole structure collapses. The key song, Stella said, understanding. They need fragments from multiple sites. Each seal contains a piece of the original song, the thing that was sealed away. Individual fragments are powerful but incomplete. If they gather enough fragments and reassemble them, they reconstruct the key song itself, Gandalf finished. The complete original, and with that, they can break not just individual seals, but the entire network simultaneously, release everything that's been contained. Aragorn had been listening while continuing his search of the cult's belongings. Now he held up the leather journal he'd found earlier. This might tell us which sites they're prioritizing. It's written in cipher, but the symbols are consistent with what we've seen before. Given time, Stella could probably decode it. We don't have time, Gandalf said. But he took the journal anyway, flipping through pages covered in dense notation that mixed text, musical measures, and geometric diagrams. The cult won't wait for us to catch up. They're already moving toward the next site, probably arriving within hours if their transfer circles are functioning properly. He stopped on a page that showed a drawing, crude but recognizable. A troll. Not the ice troll they'd just destroyed, but something similar. Annotations surrounded the image in the cipher script. They're breeding them, Gandalf said, disgust evident in his voice. Or growing them, or summoning them. However you want to describe it, they're deliberately creating troll guardians at each site. The ice troll wasn't a natural phenomenon they exploited. It was a construct they built. How? Aragorn asked. Gandalf traced the annotations, picking out symbols he recognized despite the cipher. Oath ice. They're collecting it, harvesting broken promises, stolen burdens, the conceptual residue of wrong song. Then they're using ritual to concentrate it, give it form and hunger and purpose. The trolls are essentially weaponized consequences, animated punishment. Can we do the same? Stella asked. If we understand the process? No, Gandalf said flatly. What the cult is doing is fundamentally corrupting. building weapons out of human failure and magical violation. Even if we could replicate the process, even if it would be tactically advantageous, we won't. That path leads to becoming what we're fighting against. He closed the journal and tucked it into his robes, but understanding their process gives us an advantage. We know what to expect at the next site. Another troll, probably. Another vault with a fragment. Another ritual circle for escape. Knowing the pattern means we can prepare, can adapt our approach. "Which site do we hit next?" Aragorn asked, studying the chalked map. "If we can't defend all 4 remaining locations, we need to choose strategically." Gandalf examined the map more carefully. The 4 unmarked sites were distributed across a region spanning roughly 100 miles, too far apart to defend sequentially with their current resources and timeline. But the sites weren't equal. The symbols marking each location varied slightly, small differences in the iron and crown sigil that probably indicated significance or priority. One site showed the crown symbol drawn larger, more detailed, emphasized. "There," Gandalf said, pointing. "That's their primary target, the site they most want to reach, which means it's the site we most need to deny them." "Where is it?" Stella asked. Aragorn compared the chalked map to his own mental geography of the region. "North, high mountains. There's an old fortress in that area, pre-human construction, built by someone or something that understood stone in ways we've lost. It's called Wraithkeep in the contemporary maps, though I don't know the original name." "Wraithkeep," Gandalf repeated, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition, concern, a weighing of risks that came out heavier than he'd hoped. "I've heard of it. Never been there, but the name appears in old records. It's supposed to be one of the strongest seal sites, which is why it's also one of the most dangerous if compromised." "How dangerous?" Aragorn asked. "The kind of dangerous that made the original seal builders choose an isolated mountain fortress as the containment site rather than somewhere more accessible," Gandalf said. "What's sealed there isn't just powerful, it's aware, active, capable of influencing its surroundings even through intact seals. If the cult breaks that seal, if they retrieve that fragment—" He didn't finish, but the implication was clear enough. "So we go there," Stella said. "Before they do, set up our own defenses, prepare the ground, turn their ambush site into ours." "We go there," Gandalf agreed, "but not unprepared, not making the same mistakes we've made before." He looked at each of them in turn. "At Blackwater Bridge we were reactive, responding to a ritual already in progress. Here at Iron Crown we were racing against time, fighting a troll that had been positioned and conditioned before we arrived. At Wraithkeep we need to be proactive. We need to think like the cult, anticipate their approach, and be ready not just to disrupt, but to destroy their capability completely." "How?" Aragorn asked. Gandalf moved back to the cult's ritual circle, studying it with new attention. "They're using transfer circles for rapid deployment, which means they need anchor points, prepared locations at each site where the circle can lock onto. If we can identify and destroy the anchor point at Wraithkeep before they arrive, we cut off their fast travel option, force them to approach conventionally, which gives us time." "And the troll?" Stella asked. "If there's already one position there, then we deal with it on our terms, not theirs," Gandalf said. "The ice troll was vulnerable to resonance, to its own nature turned against it through harmonic amplification. If the Wraithkeep troll is built on similar principles, we can use the same approach. But this time, we'll be prepared. This time we'll know what we're walking into." He pulled out the leather journal again, flipping to pages that showed ritual diagrams and what might have been construction notes for the troll binding process. This is our advantage. They don't know we have their documentation. They don't know we understand their methodology. They think we're just disruptive, obstacles to overcome rather than opponents who can predict and counter. You're talking about a trap, Aragorn said. Let them think Wraithkeep is secure. Let them commit to the assault, then hit them when they're most vulnerable. Exactly, Gandalf confirmed. But a trap requires bait. We need something that will draw them to Wraithkeep specifically, make them prioritize it over the other sites. Us, Stella said quietly. We're the bait. They know we have the Iron Crown fragment. If they think we're heading to Wraithkeep to secure that site's fragment as well, if they think they can catch us in one place and recover both fragments simultaneously, they'll commit everything they have, Gandalf finished. Bring their full team, their best resources, their most powerful workings, which is exactly when they'll be most exposed. It was a dangerous plan, a plan that required them to position themselves as targets, to invite exactly the kind of confrontation that had already cost Alfharin his life. But it was also the only plan that had a realistic chance of stopping the cult's progression before they gathered enough fragments to reconstruct the key song. When do we leave? Aragorn asked. Gandalf looked out the window at the darkness that pressed against the glass. Dawn. We need rest, actual rest. Not just tactical pauses. The fight at Wraithkeep will be harder than anything we've faced so far. We need to arrive as prepared as possible. And Alfharin, Stella asked quietly, voicing the question no one had wanted to ask. What do we do? Gandalf was silent for a long moment. Then, we carry him out. When we leave at dawn, we take him with us. There's a burial ground 3 miles west, old, maintained by rangers, a place where those who die in service are honored. He deserves that, deserves better than being left in a vault surrounded by cult markings and failed magic. It wasn't practical. Carrying a dead wolf's body 3 miles out of their way, spending time and energy on burial when time and energy were resources they couldn't spare. But some things mattered more than practicality. Some debts demanded payment regardless of cost. Chapter 9. Complete 6001 characters with spaces. Dawn came reluctantly to the Iron Crown Tower, the sun struggling to penetrate clouds that had thickened overnight into an oppressive gray ceiling that pressed down on the mountains like a lid on a pot. The light, when it finally arrived, was pale and cold, offering illumination without warmth, visibility without comfort. Gandalf had not slept. He'd spent the night in the vault, sitting beside Alfharin's shrouded form, ostensibly keeping watch, but actually doing something far more difficult. Processing loss in the particular way wizards process such things. Not with tears or outward grief, but with an internal accounting that acknowledged the cost, honored the sacrifice, and then carefully, deliberately filed it away in a place where it could be remembered without becoming crippling. The bond was still broken. That fundamental connection that had existed between wizard and wolf, the wordless communication, the shared awareness, the sense of presence that had made solitude impossible even when physically alone, remained severed. The absence was profound, like losing a sense, like going deaf in a way that had nothing to do with ears. But Gandalf was old, and old meant experienced in loss. He knew how to function despite wounds that hadn't healed, how to carry grief as a companion rather than a master. He would mourn Alfharin properly, when there was time, when the mission allowed, when doing so wouldn't endanger the living. Now, in the gray dawn, was not that time. He emerged from the vault to find Aragorn already awake and preparing for departure. The ranger had repacked their supplies with the efficient economy of someone who'd done this thousands of times, redistributing weight to account for the loss of Alfharin's ability to carry gear, consolidating what they'd need for the journey to Wraithkeep. "Stella?" Gandalf asked. "Still sleeping," Aragorn said quietly. "She earned it. The resonance work in the vault took more out of her than she's admitting. I'll wake her in a few minutes." Gandalf nodded approval. He moved to the window and looked out over the valley below. The frost patterns, the glass grass and frozen fingerprints that had marked the ice troll's territory were beginning to fade now that the creature was destroyed. Not melting exactly, but diminishing, as if reality was slowly reasserting normal rules over the space that had been claimed by wrong magic. "I've been thinking about the plan," Aragorn said, joining him at the window. "The trap for Wraithkeep. It's sound tactically, but it relies on the cult making specific choices, prioritizing that site, committing their full strength, arriving when and how we expect. If any of those assumptions are wrong, then we adapt," Gandalf said simply. "Planning is useful. Rigid adherence to plans is usually fatal. We'll establish the broad framework, destroy their anchor point, prepare defensive positions, set conditions that favor us, and then respond to what actually happens rather than what we expect. And if what actually happens is overwhelming force, if they bring more than we can handle, then we fall back, regroup, and try again elsewhere," Gandalf said. "This isn't our last opportunity, just our best current one." He turned from the window and looked directly at Aragorn. "You're questioning the plan because you think I'm making decisions from grief rather than strategy. That losing Alfharin has compromised my judgment." Aragorn didn't deny it. "Has it?" "Probably," Gandalf admitted with the blunt honesty that came from knowing self-deception served no one. "Grief affects judgment, makes you either too cautious because you're afraid of additional loss or too aggressive because you want revenge. I'm trying to compensate, to recognize when emotion is driving decisions and adjust accordingly. But I'm not infallible, which is why I need you to keep questioning, to push back when plans seem motivated by the wrong reasons." It was as much vulnerability as Gandalf typically allowed, and Aragorn recognized it as the trust it represented. "Understood," he said. "I'll keep questioning." Stella emerged from the upper floor, moving with the stiff, careful motions of someone whose body had been pushed beyond comfortable limits. Her hands were bandaged, rough field dressing over the cuts the resonance work had caused, and her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion that sleep had only partially addressed. "How long until we leave?" she asked. "An hour," Gandalf said. "We need to reach the burial ground by midday, complete the rites, then make for Wraithkeep. It's a 2-day journey if we push hard. 3 days if we're carrying—" Stella stopped, the reality of what they'd be carrying catching up with her. "I'm sorry. That was tactless. It was practical," Gandalf corrected gently. "And you're right. Carrying Alfharin's body will slow us, but some things are worth the time they cost." They prepared in silence, each focused on their own tasks. Aragorn completed the packing, distributing gear and supplies. Stella studied the cult's journal, working on the cipher with the fragment of the key song laid out beside her as reference. Some of the notations in the journal corresponded to patterns in the fragment, and cross-referencing them was helping her break the code. Gandalf returned to the vault. Alfharin's body had not changed. The White Hunger's effect was preservation as much as destruction, stopping decay along with everything else. Wrapped in Gandalf's gray cloak, the wolf looked almost peaceful, as if sleeping rather than stopped. Gandalf knelt beside the body and spoke quietly. Not a spell, not a ritual, just words that needed to be said whether anyone heard them or not. "You were the best of companions," he said. "Loyal without servility, brave without recklessness. You asked for nothing but partnership and gave everything in return. What you did, drawing the troll's final attack, giving us the opening we needed, that was the act of someone who understood sacrifice not as loss, but as choice. You chose to protect, chose to give your life meaning by spending it on something that mattered. He paused, and for a moment the wizard's composure cracked, not breaking, but showing the strain underneath. I should have protected you better, should have anticipated the troll's final attack, should have positioned differently, should have... He stopped himself. Guilt was natural, but indulging it was neither useful nor what Alfharin would have wanted. The wolf had made his choice with full awareness. Honoring that choice meant accepting it rather than second-guessing. I will remember you, Gandalf said instead. Your name will not be lost to the White Hunger or anything else. Alfharin, companion, friend, brother in everything but blood. Rest now. You've more than earned it. He stood, and with careful gentleness that contrasted with his usual efficient movements, he lifted the shrouded body. The wolf was heavy, 60 pounds of muscle and bone, but Gandalf was stronger than his appearance suggested, and he'd carried burdens far heavier than physical weight. He emerged from the vault carrying Alfharin, and Aragorn and Stella stood immediately, not at attention exactly, but with the posture of respect that came automatically in the presence of honored dead. "Ready?" Gandalf asked. They nodded. Together they left the Iron Crown Tower. The door hung broken from the troll's forced entry, and they didn't bother trying to secure it. Let the cult return if they wanted. Let them find their ritual circle disrupted, their troll destroyed, their vault emptied. Let them understand that the opposition they faced was not merely disruptive, but capable of turning their own weapons against them. The journey to the burial ground took 3 hours instead of the normal 90 minutes. Carrying Alfharin required frequent stops, not because Gandalf lacked the strength, but because maintaining the careful grip that prevented the body from being jostled or dishonored required constant muscle engagement that even wizard endurance found taxing. The burial ground was exactly what Aragorn had described. Old, maintained, a place of peace carved out of wilderness. Stone markers stood in neat rows, each carved with names and dates and sometimes brief epitaphs. Rangers, mostly. People who died in service to something larger than themselves. A fitting place. They dug the grave together, Aragorn and Stella with tools from the Ranger's pack, Gandalf using magic to assist where manual labor became impractical. The ground was cold but not frozen, yielding to effort with the steady resistance of earth that knew its purpose. When the grave was ready, deep enough to discourage scavengers, oriented properly according to the traditions of the burial ground, Gandalf laid Alpharin's body carefully within. The gray cloak remained wrapped around the wolf, a final gesture of care from the wizard who had been companion and partner. Gandalf spoke a few words, formal, ancient, the kind of blessing that acknowledged death without fearing it, that honored service without demanding it. Then he used magic to fill the grave, stone and earth flowing back into place with the precision of good masonry, sealing the wolf beneath ground that would hold him safely. They marked the grave with a stone, nothing elaborate, just a river rock with Alpharin's name carved cleanly into its surface. Simple, honest, exactly what the wolf would have wanted if wolves wanted such things. Stella placed a small bundle at the grave's head, dried meat from their supplies, a gesture toward the old tradition of providing for the journey beyond. Aragorn added a ranger's token, a small iron compass rose, symbol of those who walked far from home in service of others. Gandalf contributed nothing physical. Instead, he spoke Alpharin's name one final time, clearly, deliberately, refusing the world's tendency toward forgetting and unnamed erasure. Then they stood in silence for a time that had no measure, not long by the clock, forever by the heart. Finally, Gandalf turned away. "We need to move," he said. "Wraithkeep is 2 days north, and the cult will already be positioning. We've mourned. Now we work." It was harsh. It was also necessary. Grief had its time and place, and that time was past. What remained was mission, purpose, the work that Alfharin had died enabling. They gathered their gear and headed north, leaving the burial ground behind. Behind them, the marked grave stood among the others, one more name added to the roll of those who had given everything in service of something worth the cost. The wind moved through the stones, carrying with it the faint sound of something that might have been wolves howling in the far distance, or might have been just wind. Either way, Alfharin was no longer alone, and ahead, in the high, cold mountains, Wraithkeep waited with whatever horrors the cult had prepared. The white hunger had taken its price. Now came the reckoning. 2 days of hard travel brought them to Wraithkeep's approach just as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The fortress was visible from miles away, a dark silhouette against gray sky, perched on a mountain shelf that seemed deliberately chosen to be as inaccessible as possible. The architecture was wrong in the way very old things were wrong. Proportions that didn't quite match human scale, angles that seemed correct until you looked directly at them and realized they violated geometry in subtle but profound ways. Pre-human construction, Aragorn had said. Now, seeing it, Gandalf understood that pre-human might be generous. This place predated humanity not by centuries but by ages. Whatever had built Wraithkeep had understood stone in ways that made current masonry look like children stacking blocks. "There," Stella said, pointing to a section of the approach road where recent disturbance was visible even from distance. "Someone's been through recently. Multiple people, moving fast." Aragorn studied the ground with a tracker's eye. Within the last day, 5, maybe 6 individuals. They're not bothering to hide their trail. Either they're confident in their security or they don't care if we know they're here. Both, probably, Gandalf said. He could feel it now, the weight of active magic pressing down from the fortress above. Wards, barriers, workings designed to detect and repel intrusion. The cult had been here long enough to establish defensive measures. They know we're coming. They've known since we took the Iron Crown fragment. This is their prepared ground. "Do we abort?" Aragorn asked. "Find another approach? Hit a different site?" "No," Gandalf said firmly. "Wraithkeep is their priority target. That hasn't changed. If we let them claim it unopposed, they get the most valuable fragment in the network. Better to fight here, on ground they've prepared, than to let them succeed and become stronger." They advanced carefully, watching for traps both mundane and magical. The cult didn't disappoint. They found 3 separate ward lines across the approach road, each designed to alert defenders to intrusion. Gandalf dismantled them with the methodical precision of someone who'd been breaking wards since before most of the cult members were born. But doing so took time and energy he'd have preferred to save for the actual confrontation. The fortress entrance was a massive gate set into living rock, iron-bound wood that had turned black with age, covered in symbols that made Stella go pale when she recognized them. "Sealing marks," she said. "Original ones, not cult editions. This gate isn't just an entrance, it's part of the containment structure. Opening it incorrectly could weaken the seal we're trying to protect." "How do we open it correctly?" Aragorn asked. Stella studied the symbols, cross-referencing with what she'd learned from the cult journal. "There's a sequence, a pattern of touches that has to be executed precisely. Get it wrong and..." She gestured vaguely at the fortress. Bad things. Possibly very bad things. Can you do it? Gandalf asked. I think so. The journal had notes on this. The cult leader who scouted this site documented the opening sequence, but it's complex, and if I make a mistake, you won't, Gandalf said with absolute confidence. You've proven your skill repeatedly. Trust it. Stella took a breath, steadied herself, then began the sequence. Her fingers moved across the symbols in a pattern that looked almost like playing an invisible instrument, touching specific marks in specific orders, applying pressure that varied from barely perceptible to firmly deliberate. The gate responded, not opening immediately but acknowledging, the symbols beginning to glow faintly, responding to correct input the way a lock responded to the right key. Then, with a sound like stone grinding against stone despite being made of wood and iron, the gate swung inward. Beyond lay darkness. Not the ordinary darkness of unlit interior spaces, but something thicker, more present, darkness that seemed to have weight and intention. Stay close, Gandalf said, raising his staff. Light bloomed, warm, bright, defiant against the pressing dark. It pushed back the shadows enough to reveal a corridor carved from solid rock, extending deeper into the mountain than the light could reach. They entered, weapons ready, senses alert. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, so large that Gandalf's staff light couldn't reach the far walls. The ceiling was lost in shadow above. The floor was polished stone, smooth and level, clearly worked rather than natural. And in the chamber's center, waiting with the patience of something that had all the time in the world, another troll. But not like the ice troll. This one was larger, 10 feet tall at minimum, hunched over in a way that suggested it could reach 12 or more if it straightened. Its body wasn't ice, but stone, gray granite threaded with veins of darker material that might have been obsidian or might have been something that only looked like obsidian. Where the ice troll had been cold, this one radiated heat, not comfortable warmth, but the oppressive heat of deep earth, of stone under pressure, of geological forces compressed into animate form. A stone troll, a creature of oath rock instead of oath ice. Different manifestation, same fundamental principle. Consequences given form, punishment made flesh. New strategy, Gandalf said quickly, mind racing through tactical options. The resonance approach that worked on the ice troll won't work the same way here. Stone doesn't shatter from harmonic vibration the way ice does. It absorbs and disperses. Then what's the weakness? Aragorn demanded, already moving to flank, establishing position. I don't know yet, Gandalf admitted. We'll have to... The troll moved. Fast. Impossibly fast for something that size and composition. One massive arm swept toward them in an arc that would crush anything it connected with. They scattered. Aragorn left, Stella right, Gandalf backward. The arm missed by inches, impacted the floor with force that cracked the polished stone and sent fragments flying like shrapnel. It's stronger than the ice troll, Aragorn called out, positioning behind a stone pillar for cover. More aggressive. It's not going to give us time to analyze. He was right. The stone troll was already moving again, targeting Gandalf with the focused attention of something that recognized the wizard as the primary threat. Both arms swung in sequence, a combination attack designed to eliminate dodge options. Gandalf raised his staff and spoke a word of power. A barrier materialized, not physical but force-based, a wall of compressed air that caught the troll's arms and deflected them just enough to prevent direct impact. But the barrier shattered under the force. Gandalf staggered, the magical feedback hitting him like a physical blow. The troll pressed its advantage, moving forward with grinding steps that left cracks in the stone floor. It was herding Gandalf toward the chamber's wall, limiting his mobility. Stella acted. She pulled the iron-crowned fragment from inside her shirt and held it high, beginning the resonance trigger, the same technique that had destroyed the ice troll. The fragment sang. The chamber's walls, carved with more of those musical notation grooves, responded, beginning to resonate. The stone troll paused, turned its attention to Stella, but instead of being damaged by the resonance, it seemed to absorb it, the vibrations disappearing into its stone body without visible effect. "It's not working," Stella shouted. "Different material, different rules," Gandalf managed, still recovering from the barrier's destruction. "Stone absorbs vibration. We need a different approach." The troll lunged at Stella. Aragorn intercepted, not trying to fight it directly, but throwing a weighted rope around one massive leg, pulling hard to upset balance. It worked, partially. The troll stumbled, crashed to one knee, but the rope snapped under the strain, and the creature recovered almost immediately. They were losing. The stone troll was adapting to every strategy they attempted, learning their patterns, pressing advantage with the relentless efficiency of something that didn't tire, didn't doubt, didn't fear. Gandalf's mind raced. Different material, different weakness. Ice shattered from resonance. Stone absorbed resonance. What damaged stone? What broke it when vibration couldn't? Pressure, focused, directional pressure. Not dispersed force, but concentrated, like a chisel against a specific point. "Stella," he called. "The fragment. Can you change the resonance pattern? Make it directional instead of omnidirectional?" She understood immediately. "Yes, if I have time to recalibrate." Aragorn, buy her time. The ranger didn't argue, just moved, drawing the troll's attention with movement, with thrown objects, with anything that would keep it focused away from Stella while she worked. The troll took the bait, pursuing Aragorn with single-minded focus. But it was learning. Its attacks were becoming more predictive, cutting off escape routes, forcing Aragorn into increasingly desperate dodges. Stella's hands moved over the fragment, fingers tracing new patterns in the air above it. The fragment's song changed, no longer radiating equally in all directions, but beginning to focus, to concentrate toward specific vectors. "Ready!" she shouted. "Target the joints," Gandalf commanded. "Where the arms connect to the torso, the articulation points will be weaker than solid mass." Stella adjusted her hand positions, and the fragment's focused resonance lanced toward the troll's right shoulder, not trying to vibrate the whole structure but concentrating force on the specific point where arm met body. The effect was immediate. The stone at the joint began to crack, not shattering dramatically but developing stress fractures, lines of weakness spreading from the focused pressure point. The troll roared, a sound like grinding consonants, and swung its damaged arm. The movement was slower, less coordinated. The joint was compromised. "Again," Gandalf ordered. "Other shoulder." Stella redirected the resonance. The left shoulder began to crack under the same focused pressure. But the troll was adapting. Instead of trying to attack with damaged arms, it charged, using its whole body as a weapon, intending to crush them through mass and momentum. Aragorn was directly in its path. No time to dodge, no cover close enough to reach. Gandalf acted on pure instinct. He thrust his staff forward and released every ounce of stored power he'd been conserving, not as a careful working, not as a precisely controlled spell, but as raw force, kinetic energy, heat, light, sound, all compressed into a single explosive release. The blast hit the charging troll center mass. For a moment, one frozen instant, the troll stopped, its momentum arrested by force that was fundamentally opposed to its nature. Then the troll's chest cracked, not dramatically, just a crack, running from the point of impact downward toward the legs, splitting the torso along a vertical line. The crack widened, The troll's weight became its enemy. The fracture couldn't support the structure. The creature tried to continue fighting, but the crack had reached critical depth. The torso began to separate along the fault line. The troll collapsed in stages, torso splitting, arms separating at damaged shoulders, legs buckling as weight distribution failed. Within seconds, what had been coherent became broken stone and dark veins that no longer pulsed. Silence, broken only by heavy breathing as they processed survival. "Is it dead?" Stella asked. Gandalf approached carefully. "Destroyed. The animating force is dispersed." The final blow had been struck, but the final price had not yet been paid. The stairs descended deep into Wraithkeep's foundation, carved from bedrock that predated human memory. Each step was worn smooth in the center from countless feet over countless ages. Whoever had built this place had used it regularly, walking these stairs so many times that stone itself had yielded. Gandalf led with staff raised, light pushing back darkness that seemed reluctant to retreat. Behind him, Aragorn and Stella moved in practiced formation, weapons ready, exhaustion temporarily overridden by adrenaline. The vault chamber at the bottom was different from Iron Crown's. Larger, perhaps 30 feet across instead of 15. The ceiling was higher, carved into a dome that created natural acoustics. And the walls weren't just carved with musical notation grooves. They were inlaid with metal. Silver, or something that looked like silver, forming patterns that were simultaneously musical measures and geometric sigils. "This is more than a storage vault," Stella said quietly, studying the intricate metalwork. "This is a performance chamber, a place designed not just to hold a key song fragment, but to allow it to be played, to be activated under controlled conditions. Which means what's stored here is more than just notation," Gandalf concluded. "It's a functional piece of the original song." In the chamber's center stood a reliquary, much larger and more ornate than Iron Crown's. It was constructed from dark stone and bound with iron bands, and it was open, empty. "They beat us here," Aragorn said, moving to examine it. "No," Gandalf said, studying the chamber. "Look at the dust patterns. No one's disturbed this chamber in weeks, possibly months. The reliquary's been open for a long time." "Then where's the fragment?" Stella asked. Gandalf approached and peered inside. The interior showed the clear impression of something that had rested there, something roughly the size of a small book. "Someone took it," he said, "but not the cult. This was removed carefully, respectfully. The cult's method is smash and grab. This was deliberate preservation." "Could it have been another wizard?" Aragorn suggested. "Possible," Gandalf acknowledged. "But if so, why not move all of them? Why leave the Iron Crown fragment while relocating this one?" "Because this one is different," Stella said, studying the silver inlay. "The notation here, it's not just documentation. It's operational. This chamber was maintaining the fragment, keeping it active, using this space as a kind of resonance engine to sustain its power over time. And if the fragment was removed from that environment," Gandalf began, "it would start to degrade," Stella finished. "The song would lose coherence over months or years." Gandalf processed this rapidly. "So either it was moved to a similar vault or whoever took it has been actively maintaining it through other means. Either way, the cult can't access it here." "Then why position a troll?" Aragorn asked. "Because they didn't know it was empty," Gandalf said. "They knew Wraithkeep should contain a fragment, but not that it had been relocated. They prepared based on assumption." A sound from above interrupted. Soft scraping, like stone moving against stone. Someone was in the chamber above, trying to move quietly. The cult had arrived. Gandalf gestured for silence and moved to the stairwell, listening. Multiple people, at least 3, possibly more, cautious but not expert footsteps. Ritualists, not trained infiltrators, which made them dangerous in different ways. The temperature dropped suddenly. Frost began forming on the stairs, spreading downward with unnatural speed. "Another troll," Stella said, recognizing the White Hunger's signature. "They're trying to freeze us in, trap us in the vault, and let the cold do the killing while they maintain the seal from above." "Can we break out?" Aragorn asked. "Eventually," Gandalf said, "but that's exactly the scenario where we're most vulnerable. We need to reverse the trap." "How?" Stella asked. Gandalf looked at the empty reliquary, at the silver-inlaid walls. "The Iron Crown Fragment. This chamber is designed to amplify exactly that kind of object. If we activate it here, the resonance will be massive," Stella said, understanding. "Detectable for miles." "Exactly," Gandalf confirmed. "The cult thinks the fragment is sealed here. If they sense it activating, if they think someone is claiming or destroying it, they'll have to respond directly, abandon their siege position above, and walk into our trap," Aragorn said approvingly. The frost was spreading faster, beginning to reach the vault floor. Minutes at most before the cold became dangerous. "Do it," Gandalf ordered. "Stella, activate the fragment. Full resonance. Make it obvious." Stella moved to the chamber's center and placed the Iron Crown fragment on the impression where Wraithkeep's fragment should have rested. She positioned her hands and began the activation sequence. The fragment responded immediately. The resonance that began was nothing like the controlled trigger used against the trolls. This was the fragment singing with its full voice. The silver inlay blazed with light. The acoustic dome amplified the sound into a chord, then a harmony, then a full orchestral arrangement that seemed to have depth beyond mere audio. The walls vibrated. The floor trembled. The air thickened with song made manifest. Above, voices shouted in alarm. Running footsteps. The cult was reacting exactly as predicted, abandoning their position, descending to stop what they believed was an attempt to claim Wraithkeep's fragment. Gandalf, Aragorn, and Stella positioned themselves defensively. The first cultist appeared, a young man in dark robes, eyes wide with fear and determination. He saw the blazing fragment, saw the defenders, and understood he'd walked into a trap. He tried to retreat, but others pushed forward behind him. 4 cult members spilled into the vault in a confused tangle. "Surrender," Gandalf said clearly, staff raised and glowing. "The fragment is secured. Your troll is destroyed. Your position is compromised. Surrender, and you'll be treated fairly." For a moment it seemed possible. Then the cult leader appeared at the top of the stairs. The chant leader from Blackwater Bridge, looking exactly the same. Composed, confident, showing no fear. "You've been very disruptive," he said conversationally. "Blackwater Bridge, Iron Crown, now here. You're costing us considerable resources." "Then stop," Gandalf suggested. "Stop attempting to break the seals." The chant leader smiled. "Walk away from enlightenment? No, I don't think so." He gestured, and the 4 cultists moved with sudden coordination, beginning to chant in synchronized rhythm. The crowning verse, or a variant. They were attempting a ritual in real time, using the fragment's activated resonance as fuel. Stella moved immediately, trying to shut down the fragment. But the chant leader spoke a command word, and Stella's disruption faltered. The fragment's resonance continued, being pulled toward the cult's rhythm. Aragorn threw a knife at the nearest cultist. The cultist fell, the chant breaking, the synchronization disrupted. But 3 remained chanting, and the chant leader descended, his voice joining theirs with perfect timing. Gandalf released the working he'd been building, a dispersion effect that unwove active magical structures with brutal efficiency. The cult's ritual shattered, the cultists staggered, one collapsed. But the chant leader absorbed the disruption, redirecting the dispersed energy back toward the fragment. "The cult is more sophisticated than you've given us credit for," he said calmly. "We've developed counters that turn your strength against you." He spoke another command, and the fragment suddenly changed pitch. The sound became painful, discordant, physically uncomfortable. Stella gasped and fell to her knees. Aragorn pressed hands to ears. Even Gandalf felt it, something that bypassed defenses and struck directly at physiology. The chant leader continued descending while his technique kept everyone incapacitated. Then Aragorn, through sheer willpower, forced himself to move. He couldn't stand or aim properly, but he could throw. His last knife left his hand in a spinning arc. It struck the chant leader's shoulder, not killing, but enough to break his concentration. The discordant sound stopped. Gandalf acted immediately, pouring everything into a working that was less spell and more fundamental rejection. A flat no directed at the chant leader's presence. The chant leader flew backward, hurled up the stairs, and crashed against stone hard enough to stun. "Now," Gandalf commanded. "Stella, shut down the fragment. Aragorn, secure the cultists." They moved with desperate efficiency. Stella spoke the termination sequence. The resonance died, the silver inlay fading. Aragorn bound the fallen cultists with rope. Gandalf advanced on the chant leader, staff raised, but the cult leader was already retreating, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder, his expression showing genuine respect for the first time. "This isn't over," he called down. "You've won today, but there are 4 more sites. We'll adapt. You can't stop us everywhere." Then he was gone, and moments later, the sound of a transfer circle activating, the cult's escape route. Gandalf could have pursued, but doing so would have meant abandoning Aragorn and Stella alone with potentially dangerous prisoners. Some battles you won, some you let go. This one, he let go. The warmth that remained in the aftermath was complicated. They'd secured the Iron Crown fragment. They'd prevented the cult from claiming Wraithkeep's fragment. They'd destroyed another troll, captured 4 cult members. But they'd also learned the cult was more prepared, more sophisticated, more dangerous than previous confrontations suggested. And Alfharin was still dead. The warmth that remained was enough to continue, but barely.